This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo back from Los Angeles within all this going on. Wonderful to see Lisa Mateo back here. We're going to continue our coverage of these horrific events in Butler, Pennsylvania. The recovery of the former president ensconced in Milwaukee. Lots of news flow there this morning, and we'll touch upon this as well. But Paul, both you and I were talking. We got to still focus on these markets into earnings in Goldman Sachs at 7:30.
Goldman Sachs at 7:30, Tom. We've seen some pretty solid results coming from some of these banks here. We have the futures looking to open higher here, Tom. The S&P
nicely higher,
about 0.4%. NASDAQ up about 0.5%. 10-year Treasury a little bit higher here, 4.21% on your.
Interesting dynamics. Kit Jukes with an incredibly smart note we'll touch upon out of SocGen today on dollar dynamics as a measurement of the shock that we all face across America. The dollar rallying on the fear and is now easing back as we find some point of normalcy into the Republican convention. Joe Matthew and Katie Lyons, Balance of Power in Milwaukee. We're out on YouTube. Search and subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. It's the best way to find us. You go to Chrome, you type in YouTube Bloomberg Podcasts.
Yep.
You get there if you want to see Lisa Mateo on Android, Apple Android as well, Android Auto, I should say. Lisa was going down Sunset Boulevard, listening to Apple CarPlay.
I'm sure she
worked out well. With our Bloomberg Business Flash from the Interactive Broker Studio, tanned and rested, Lisa Mateo.
Oh, yes, and it is good to be back. But like you said, markets really reacting to everything that happened over the weekend. So we have the dollar rising, futures advancing. You have these thoughts of Republicans return to the White House, bringing in looser fiscal policy, higher tariffs. You have NASDAQ futures up 0.5%, Dow futures up 0.5%. S&P futures up 0.4%. You have the 30-year yield rose above the 2-year rate for the first time since January. We'll check in right now. We have the 30-year yield 4.45%. That's up 5 basis points. The 2-year yield at 4.45%. That's a little change right now. We have the 10-year at 4.22%, and that's up 3 basis points. The assassination attempt also pushed up Bitcoin briefly above 63,000. Trump has positioned himself as pro-crypto, so that's the reason for that. You have Bitcoin now at 62,561. Shares of Trump Media and Technology Group up 55%. That's putting that company on course to erase a 37% slump since the end of May. And to earnings we go. BlackRock shares little change. It hit a $10.6 trillion asset record. We also have more bank earnings. Like you said, Goldman Sachs about a half hour from now. Their shares right now up about nearly 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thank you so much. Our guests have been just a tour de force in the last 72 hours, led by none other than Greg Valliere with all of his experience, a gentleman from New Hampshire. And Greg, your note this morning is blistering of a potential Republican landslide. Maybe that's why the market's looking at taxes and things. The Trumpian stimulus, if you will, is giving me a lift. Dow up 0.4%. I want to cut to the chase. I have learned, Greg Valliere, that Nimrata Nikki Randhawa will speak to the GOP, I believe, tomorrow. We know her as Nikki Haley of South Carolina. What will Governor Haley speak to at this convention, and will Donald Trump be listening to her?
Well, to be cynical, Tom, good morning. I think she's speaking to 2008. I think she is going to run in 2008. She knows it. So I think that's going to be the big one.
So, Greg, I'm just looking at your note here this morning, right out hot off the presses, and the title says it all, the Trump landslide. How did the political calculus change over the weekend?
Oh, I think that the iconic photo of Trump with his fist clenched, with blood streaming down his face, I mean, that's just pure political gold, to be cynical again. So I think that it will, Ronald Reagan had an 11-point pop when he got shot. I'm not saying Trump's going to have an 11-point pot, but I think it'll be big.
I look, Greg, at how we digest this, and we're all coming out of the shock, and there's moments of calm. We're an image of the former president getting off his airplane in Milwaukee, of how somehow getting back to normalcy. When would you guess, with all of your political experience, the GOP and President Trump, former President Trump, get back to normalcy? Is it a matter of hours, days, or will it take months?
I think it could take a long time. Maybe we do go all the way to 2018, as Nikki Haley is going to go. I think that there's still an awful lot to be decided on Capitol Hill. Will we have a landslide in the House and Senate? Unclear. The Senate needs to have 60 votes to pass anything. That's unclear. So it's not like he's got a free rein, but I would say the issue now is not whether Trump will win, but how much will he win by.
Paul, what I love about Greg Valliere is he does just what I do. He misses a decade. He just said 2018.
Yeah, I did.
It's 28. Yeah. Greg, I do that. I don't do it on a daily basis. I'd say every 3 days I miss a decade. Paul, save us.
2028. Greg, what do you expect to hear from President Trump and the Republican Party from Milwaukee this week?
Well, they'll talk about unity, but that's to be expected. But I think there'll be a lot of red meat for the delegates. I think they'll leave Milwaukee probably with a lead of 5-6 points, maybe even 7 points nationwide, and a really big lead within the battleground states. But there'll be issues. Immigration would be high on the list.
But okay, Greg, so how do the Democrats counteract this? I mean, we really had no precedent for this. I can think of some, but we're in an election. We've had an assassination attempt. You step aside gracefully, as we've heard President Biden do. And there's a point where the Democrats have to re-engage. I don't want you to get out the Valliere crystal ball and guess, but what's the political textbook on how you re-engage after a horrific event like this?
That's a really tough one. I think that Biden tried to show that he had some empathy and understood the depth of the crisis over the weekend, but he needs more than that. And I'm not sure what he's got. He has a very divided party with fundraisers saying we're not going to give any more money right now. So he's going to have to go into their convention in Chicago in mid-August with something. You're right, Tom.
How does he get to the convention with the uproar? Let's say this counterfactual. I sound like Neil Ferguson.
Yeah.
This didn't happen. Let's run the film back 72 hours. And life is normal. It's not normal right now. How does a president adapt? Does he take the high road and step aside now? I just don't get how he gets with the uproar before this horrific event to after this horrific event. How do you suggest he will prosecute his future?
Well, I think he can count. Maybe I can't this morning, but he can count. And I think he can count votes. And I think Biden realizes that right now, maybe there's 40 or 50 Democrats in the House that would vote against him. That's not 200 some. So I think that the vote still favors Biden. I think he's going to operate on that premise. What I've been saying, and I'll continue to say, is that there will be more incidents like the debate debacle. He'll have another horrible debate. He'll lose his place. He'll freeze up. And I think it only takes one more for him to be ousted. And I think one more is coming.
Greg, how does the events over the weekend, the assassination attempt, impact down ticket? Does this have an impact down ticket for the Republican Party?
I think so. I mean, traditionally, you would see a politician of either party doing really, really well, bringing others with him. So I would say yes. I would say that they're going to have a spectacular show in Milwaukee. They will. They'll put on a good show. And we'll see who the running mate is. If it's Haley, I think that would cinch it because she'll bring all the moderates. If it's Vance, I don't know. He's pretty strident. But if it was my choice, I would say Rubio, who knows geopolitics. He knows how Capitol Hill works. He's liked in the party. He's Hispanic. Rubio checks a lot of the boxes.
Greg, thank you so much. Greg is always teasing me into giving my opinion, knowing I can't. Michael Barr will put me in the timeout chair if I give my opinion. Greg Valliere, AGF Investments, go away. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Tom, Paul, Lisa, thank you very much. Former President Donald Trump is calling for unity and resilience after an attempt on his life. His opponent, President Joe Biden, implored Americans to cool it down. The events over the weekend will change the way the Biden campaign is trying to revive itself. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
The campaign had begun to focus strongly on Trump's behavior, the ability to call him a potential dictator, and his second-term agenda. Now, even in his address to the nation, Biden called for a cool down and a different direction.
We debate and disagree. We compare and contrast the character of the candidates, the records, the issues, the agenda, the vision for America. But in America, we resolve our differences at the battle box.
His current president will have to be preaching unity. It also remains to be seen how Donald Trump will approach it. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Today begins the 4-day Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Former President Trump is there. Among other prominent Republicans at the convention, that includes former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. He says that he spoke with the former president shortly before Trump headed to Wisconsin, saying that he was very excited for his RNC appearance.
Talked to President Trump today. He was in great spirits. I mean, he was telling me an unbelievable story about hearing the bullet actually come at him and go to his ear.
Former Speaker McCarthy spoke to ABC affiliate WISN's Matt Smith. This was a grim weekend as we lost several celebrities. Beverly Hills 90210 star Shannon Doherty has died. Doherty, who lost her battle with breast cancer, was 53. James Sickick of Hill Street Blues has died at age 90. Fitness guru Richard Simmons has died. His publicist says Simmons died a day after his 76th birthday. And people are remembering the life of sex therapist and talk show host Dr. Ruth Westheimer. She died in her New York City home over the weekend at the age of 96. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much for going through that list. It was a really tough weekend. I heard a lot of cheap shots against Richard Simmons. This guy changed single-handedly how we think about working out. Lisa Mateo wouldn't be Lisa Mateo without Richard Simmons giving her permission to work out 8 hours in her living room like she does every day.
Well, you got to remember, too, this guy was 236 pounds or so when he was in high school, and then all of a sudden he became fit, and he made fit like fun.
Lisa, I can't think of any modern equivalent to what Richard Simmons did in the 70s.
And I met him, and just a
ball
of energy. Please. I mean, this man would be bouncing off the walls.
So this is you, you and The Rock were in a bar in L.A. and Richard came up?
No, it was an interview I was actually doing with him, and he was just amazing. Just his whole energy, his vibe, the inspiration that he's given to others to help lose weight. It was incredible.
But I saw some cheap shots this weekend.
I know.
Yeah, and he changed. I mean, the reason Michael Barr and I are cutting shizzle balls, Richard Simmons.
We're cut on.
May he rest in peace. Michael Barr, thank you so much for that. And, of course, for all of us, Michael Barr with world-class coverage the last 48 hours, to say the least. Paul, can we talk about the markets?
Sure.
It's a nice lift this morning.
Nice lift.
There's
to the
a
market.
quality to
we've
it.
got the indexes up about 0.5% here, with the S&P up 26 points. So we're looking
Bitcoin.
At yep, exactly. Bitcoin
Up $3,000 over the last couple of days.
4%. How about that?
Trading 24/7, and you really saw that this weekend. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Discover the future of trading with their next-generation trading platform, IBKR Desktop. Download IBKR Desktop at ibkr.com/desktop. All right, to the markets we go. Our futures pointing to a higher open, and this is after an assassination attempt of Donald Trump, kind of sparking thoughts that another Trump presidency would create a more expansive fiscal policy. Right now we have NASDAQ futures, Dow futures up 0.5%. We have S&P futures up 4%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.45%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.2223%, and that is up 4 basis points. I want to take you to the 30-year because it's at 4.46%, and that's up 6 basis points. The stock 600 edging lower, down about 0.4%. The biggest drag coming from the luxury sector. You have Burberry shares down 16% in London, suspended dividends, replaced its CEO. You also have Swatch shares down 10% in Switzerland. Disappointing update due to that China-led slowdown for luxury watchmakers. And then if you check in with other European luxury stocks, you have Gucci owner Kering down 3% in Paris, LVMH down 2% in Paris, and Richemont down 3% in Switzerland. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene from our headquarters in New York. At our headquarters in Milwaukee now, Joe Matthew, a joy to be with him in Kaylee Lines last night as he began our coverage from the Grand Old Parties convention. Joe Matthew, I found a riveting conversation you had last night with Brian Stile. He is a Paul Ryan acolyte of Wisconsin. He was energized, invigorated. I guess Wisconsin's a purple state, but suddenly Brian Stile's state looks less purple, doesn't it?
It feels a bit red right now for obvious reasons, but also when you look at the politics across Wisconsin and you drive north into the forest lands there. We're in this bar and grill type of operation here with taxidermy all over the walls because that's what you get when you leave Milwaukee. As far as this city, though, goes, I'm not sure that you would describe it as red. But Brian Stile does represent potentially the future of the Republican Party. And it's interesting to hear him call for a lower temperature. He's a policy guy, and I think he's pretty upset about what happened on Saturday.
How will his kind, nationwide, interact with this fired-up president? We have a changed Trump, we're told, after this assassination attempt. Does President Trump come closer to the politics of the congressman from Wisconsin?
This is a question that we're all waiting to get an answer to here, and it's going to be potentially a wait until Thursday, although I think the tone of this opening session and the next couple of nights when we get a running mate talking will give us some clues here. You've seen the headlines, guys. I guess he rewrote the speech. And now we're hearing, after this address last night from Joe Biden in the Oval Office, they're both singing from the same hymnal. I'm not sure America's ready for that, but what a moment that would be to have Joe Biden and Donald Trump both calling to cool things off here. The fact of the matter is, though, the Trump campaign thinks they have won this election. And Democrats right now are pretty confused about what to do with Joe Biden because nobody's talking about age and acuity this week. They're talking about the man who survived an assassination attempt. And Joe Biden's address from the Oval Office didn't seem to leave any ripples in the water last night politically.
Joe, what's the latest discussion on a vice presidential candidate?
It's the same last time we spoke. They've done a pretty good job playing this close to the vest, even though they want this to be an apprentice-style thing. I'll be honest with you. Whether it's J.D. Vance, whether it's somebody else you hear on the short list, Marco Rubio or Doug Burgum, Donald Trump has a history of surprising us and trying to get our eyes off the ball. Is there some sleight of hand going on here? And did the events of Saturday maybe change his mind on all of this? I think that maybe this name that we're going to get this week is one we haven't been talking about.
A young guy like you won't remember the shock and awe. I can tell you exactly where I was when I learned the name Dan Quayle. I was on Washington Street, Joe Matthew, in Swellesley Hills, Massachusetts, 02181. And the answer is, I heard somebody six offices away go, they used a profanity and said, Quayle? Okay, is Nikki Haley the Dan Quayle of this Milwaukee convention? All of a sudden, she's speaking. Come on, I need some meat, Joe. Give me something this early in your central...
Tom Keene just served it up on the table. If you're going to go there, I will follow you because
Please.
that is exactly the Trump psyche. That's the kind of stuff that could come
Give
here.
me a cigar.
I thought you were going to say Sarah Huckabee Sanders, by the way, which was not outside of the realm. But Nikki Haley, think of the impact that would have. It would turn the race
What
upside
would she
down.
bring?
If you
Come on,
added
you're the pro.
agreement that
Give me your inner Greg Giroux. Joe
She'd
Matthew, what does Governor
she would
Haley
bring-
bring to the former president?
The center, sanity, suburban women. That's enough to win if you put those three together.
Joe, is it the expectation
Is that simple enough for an answer?
Yeah, that's very good.
He's never been up this early, you realize.
Oh, I know.
He's got David Brudnoy hours. You don't know what that
Oh my
is.
God!
That's Boston hours.
I didn't think you were up.
Exactly.
Matthew doesn't
I just am
usually
glad
get-
that we kept you up late last night.
Oh,
Tom.
thank you. I really, on behalf of the Keene family, thank you, Joe. Paul, save us.
Hey, Joe, what is the events over the weekend? What's the expectation within the Republican National Committee about down ballot impacts here for the Republican Party? Can they really perhaps leverage this into Congress and other races?
Sure. They sure can. Lawmakers certainly think so, knowing that the attention is squarely on Donald Trump and the messaging from the GOP here. This is a moment. They can either use it or they can waste it. But that's what this 4-day period is going to be about. We're already seeing money move in that direction.
Right.
And the president's going to have to lead the way here. I suspect that we're going to see him tonight. There's talk about him appearing every night once again at his own convention. We're going to get a running mate announcement today. You don't always
What
know
time
how,
today?
even when you know it's coming, you don't know how it's going to feel when it happens. I'm hearing this afternoon. So that would feed us into the primetime program tonight, and then that individual will be speaking on Wednesday in prime time. But you know Donald Trump's going to want to go out there with this person. And my God, if it was Nikki Haley, this would stop everyone down. Donald Trump knows how to seize on a moment. But we also know, Tom, that they really don't like each other. He didn't call to
Come on,
congratulate
but
her when she dropped
Henry
out.
Cabot
So let's
Lodge.
see.
Okay, Henry Cabot Lodge. That's all I got to say about that. There is an ample history, Joe Matthew, of presidents and vice presidents not on speaking terms. Am I correct?
100%. And let's not pretend that Donald Trump was hanging out with Mike Pence all the time either. But I do think that he wants to have somebody somewhat in his own likeness. It has to be someone who is loyal and appreciates his view of the world. And, you know, that's a pretty squishy thing when you think about it. Does Nikki Haley fit the mold there with all the stuff that she said? She already worked for him once. So, yeah, Tom, why not? Let's do it.
I'm out of time, but somehow I think we'll see Joe Matthew
I
again.
think we will.
Okay. Joe Matthew, thank you so much. An honor to be with you on Balance of Power last night. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons leading our coverage in Milwaukee this morning. I didn't realize that we were on it, the vice presidential announcements today. I did not know that.
I did not know that either.
Yeah.
So that'll be key. A great way for the Republicans to kick off their convention.
Great essay in the New York Times this morning, Elizabeth Spears, and it's how the Democratic Party wants everything to be like the TV show West Wing. And they've been doing this for decades.
Right.
And it's a really, you know, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with it. It doesn't matter what I think. But it's a really interesting idea of how entertainment and what Aaron Sorkin did changed the thinking and the processes of a given party.
Yep.
Where the present Republican Party, to say the least, is a little bit different than West Wing as well. What'd you do this weekend? I didn't think you'd be in. Spain beat England, and I figured.
Great weekend of sports.
You had Spain, right?
You had Spain beating England. You had, you had a Spaniard win Wimbledon.
Yeah, and the Princess of Wales showing up was very emotional.
Yes, she did. Yes, so that was
with her
great.
cancer, that was great.
Yeah, exactly.
To see, we are here, and we are here with the markets. We're going to cover the markets today. Maybe this first hour, much more on this horrific event that shocked the nation, but. We do have to look at the markets. As Paul mentioned earlier, we have a legitimate lift in the markets. Small caps on a 3-day tear up 1% right now off the Calvacina Russell 2000 index. SPX up 27 solid points, 0.5%. And there's a certain urgency to it. The VIX doesn't tell me much yet, 12.83. Lisa mentioned the curve disinversion, 23 basis points. I haven't quoted 210 spread in ages, because I haven't felt I've had to, but there it is. As well, the 10-year real yield, I've got it 1.98%. That is up, buoyant 4 basis points here. Much more. The dollar, I'm going to call it flat this morning. From Washington, D.C., with our coverage in Milwaukee as well, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Want to get straight to Goldman Sachs. Their earnings just coming in. Second quarter sales, trading revenue topped estimates. Its CEO said it was pleased with the results. Shares right now, well, they're little change, up about 0.1%. Futures advancing. Investors increase those bets Donald Trump would win the U.S. presidential election after that assassination attempt. Right now, NASDAQ futures, Dow futures up 0.5%. S&P futures up 0.4%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.45%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.22%, and that's up 3 basis points. We have the 30-year yield, 4.45%, and that's up 5 basis points. On the economic calendar this week, today we get a read on manufacturing. Tomorrow, retail sales for June. Wednesday, the Fed issues its Beige Book economic survey. Also this week, you have data on housing starts and industrial production. More Fed speak expected from Chair Jay Powell and San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Appreciate it. From the previous earnings of roughly mid-April, Goldman Sachs is up at least 20%, if not up 21%, and now lifts, just as Lisa was talking, we go 479, 480, and now an AST of 483. I sort of like what I see. I mean, banking came in a little light, Paul.
Yep.
I guess if, I'm going to find a Shonali Bassett quibble to talk about. But all in all, I see some pretty darn good numbers, as Mr. Solomon delivered 90 days ago.
Yeah, exactly. And what I like about the Goldman story is it is not in the news. It's just business as usual. Goldman Sachs. No, extraneous news here about your CEO or what's going on in the market. Whether there's some other issues in the company, they're just putting up pretty solid numbers. The stock's up 24% year to date, up 50% over the trailing 12 months. So certainly.
So it's almost like after all the debacle and Solomon is pinata.
Yep.
I'm going to editorialize now, folks, 1 minute into the earnings report, that it's back-to-back quarters of getting it done.
Yeah,
is the high point.
If you're at Goldman Sachs, what do? You look across the street to Morgan Stanley, and the same at Morgan Stanley. You look across the street to Goldman Sachs, and year to date, Goldman Sachs up 24%, Morgan Stanley's is up about 12%. So if you're Goldman Sachs, you're feeling pretty good.
Yeah, what you're feeling good about is it's got a Mateo rally here at 480. It was flat off the earnings, but it's really putting it on now. 483 to 486, up very nicely, up $6. I'm going to call that as people figure out the excellence of these earnings, the excellence of our analysis of the ramifications for Washington of this assassination attempt has been the wonderful perspective of Henrietta Treyz with Veda Partners. She was really quite something yesterday, and we're thrilled she could revisit this morning as well. Henrietta, I've got to go narrow, as I just did with Joe Matthew. The amendment in Milwaukee is the former governor of South Carolina will darken the door. Will they listen? Will the great and worthy of the Trump future listen to Nikki Haley?
I heard your last segment. I think that's the penultimate question. Nikki Haley was able to get a huge swath of Indiana just a few weeks back, 22%, if I remember correctly. That was your suburban, female, married, educated, white voter. That is the difference between Trump most likely being ahead to lock on this election.
But the heart of the matter is, as Joe Matthew always put out and you're expert on, is presidents and vice presidents don't necessarily have to get along. That's what I learned when I read Wendy Schiller's textbook 40 years ago. It's okay that the vice president's not on the same page as the president. That's business as usual, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think people perpetually are overestimating, particularly in this day and age, how important the vice president is. It used to be that the geographic basket of voters that he or she could bring to the table was really all that you wanted. So when you hear about, a potential Kamala Harris campaign, would she pick, the governor of Pennsylvania who performed so ably this weekend? That makes sense if you're gunning for Pennsylvania. With this situation, I think what I really struggle with, and I don't see it happening, is mostly because I think there's a lot of consternation within the campaign between Trump and Haley camps. So I think the actual campaign folks, I think a lot of Trump supporters do not want to see Nikki Haley on the ticket, and that's what's going to prevent her, not any of their ideological differences.
All right, so Henrietta, with a little bit of hindsight here, how important or how impactful were the events from this weekend on the Trump candidacy here? Some folks are saying this just created a lopsided victory for the former president. Are you in that camp?
I think that we've already had 2 June and July surprises, and I don't even know what's coming in October. That's usually what we wait for. So I think it's extraordinary that anything was able to knock the Biden versus Kamala Harris dynamic off of the front page news. I didn't anticipate that that would be possible, and now here we are. So I think there's a long way to go. It's been 48 hours of everybody saying kumbaya, let's have a unity moment. We'll see if the former president can carry that through the convention. I do think that what's going to come our way, though, is a sequence of bounces that should benefit the former president, Trump, and really serve as a further deteriorator for Joe Biden. So any candidate going into a convention should expect a 3 or 4 point bump. We were expecting the polls that came out this weekend showing effectively Trump and Biden tied to show something different, to show Trump surging ahead, 2-3 points. That did not materialize. So what we have is a really divided public. And I don't know that if the unity message is going to carry through or if the chaos message is going to carry through. I mean, this is an assassination attempt. We were still learning all the details, but that fraught dynamic is not something that I think most Americans want, which is why Trump has not pulled ahead, even with all the weaknesses of Joe Biden. So I think there's a long way to go.
Henrietta, out on YouTube, on our live chat, really informed and smart, someone goes right back to the former governor of California and the fancy guy from Houston and Yale, George Bush Sr. I mean, just as a model here of what a Republican convention be like, Reagan and Bush Sr., that in itself was a shock, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And I think you could see that shock. I mean, it makes perfect electoral sense. If your biggest downfall and the widest gap in polling right now is with women, I'm not trying to imply that women vote for women. We have seen that is not true. But Trump has a serious gender gap. It's the largest that we've seen in years. And I think that Nikki Haley would go a long way where J.D. Vance has no shot. You always want to bring Ohio with you, but Trump is ahead by 9-10 points there. You don't need J.D. Vance to shoot additional shots in the arm on Ohio. You do need something different. I think the gender gap is a big issue for Trump, and I think Nikki Haley makes a lot of sense.
What do you think the Democratic Party is doing today, President Biden and the campaign are doing today and in the days ahead?
I mean, look, I went out on a pretty heavy limb a couple weeks back and said, with very high odds in the range of 70% that Biden was not going to be the nominee. And the way that I see this race shaping up, both with Nikki Haley and with everybody else waiting in the wings, is a lot of attention from everybody not named Biden and Trump is on 2028 right now. So the next steps are really going to be who decides to throw their hat in the ring and get involved here. I think Kamala Harris is the only person who can replace Biden on the ticket. And I think that those conversations have been put on the back burner. Difference of opinion in D.C. is as disparate as I've ever seen. The people that I trust most are saying, 15% odds at best that Biden gets off the ticket. But in what I'm seeing from donors, from the voters, and from the forecasting saying, we just don't see a path ahead. Biden has to get off.
Henrietta, how about a question like away from the politics of the moment? The market's up today, and off of Greg Valliere's essay on landslide, how does the betting on tax policy fold into our enthusiasm of the market?
Well, I think that really belies a lack of understanding of what it takes to turn a tax bill into law. You need 51 votes in the Senate. If Greg Valliere's note is right and it's a landslide, then you're talking maybe 55, 56 Senate seats. It makes it easier to lose a couple votes. It would make maintaining the SALT cap, for example, probably a lot easier. You need that $1.2 trillion revenue raiser to offset the cost of the rest of the bill. So certain things would be easier, but without 60 votes, without a supermajority, it doesn't make a difference. You're still not passing an immigration reform bill. That means you still need to enact anything via tariffs. And the tax bill is going to be partisan. It will not have bipartisan support.
Henrietta, thank you so much for the perspective. It's really treasured. Henrietta Treyz, huge value to us with Veda Partners this morning. I'm going to say a persistent lift to the market. And Paul, at the beginning of the pandemic, Mr. Solomon had a dividend of $1.25. and they just popped a $3 dividend.
Yep.
I think that's doing a double.
Yep, and it's got a yield there about 2.3%, so that's a range they feel comfortable with right now.
And of course, we saw that, I think, off the stress test the other day. I'm not up to speed like that. Like Michael Barr's in charge of stress tests here,
exactly.
Bloomberg Surveillance, and I think that they got a green light on the stress test, so maybe we'll see this.
A little bit of a lift to the stock here.
A little bit of a lift this morning. Futures up 25 with our news in New York City. Always stress-free. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Former President Donald Trump is calling for unity and resilience after an attempt on his life added fresh uncertainty to a tumultuous presidential campaign. His opponent, President Joe Biden, implored Americans to cool it down in the final stretch of the closely contested race and to resolve our differences at the ballot box.
Let's never lose sight of who we are. Let's remember we are the United States of America. There is nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together.
And new details are beginning to emerge on the suspected shooter who opened fire at the Trump campaign rally, killing one person and striking the former president. The shooter, Thomas Crooks, 20 years old. Authorities know a little about him. He was a member of a local sportsman club shooting range, and he was a registered Republican, but he didn't have any military experience and worked at a nursing home. Donald Trump arrived last night in Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention, which begins today. Trump is expected to call for unity instead of focusing on President Biden. He is also expected to announce his pick for vice president as soon as this week. Bloomberg breaking news managing editor Derek Wallbank.
The biggest question in my mind right now is what sort of vice president does Donald Trump pick for himself? You know, you have a couple of options on the table. Does he want somebody who's going to help him govern? Does he want someone who's going to pick up the sort of MAGA label to be, not for want of a term, a sort of an apprentice? To be able to do that, because keep in mind, if Donald Trump wins, he's got 4 years and then it's somebody else's turn. So what's he going to do in terms of this pick that's going to shape the future of the Republican Party?
Bloomberg's Derek Wallbank. And she's back in the limelight. The Princess of Wales was in the royal box at Center Court, Wimbledon. Carlos Alcaraz, by the way, is this year's men's champ at Wimbledon, beating Novak Djokovic. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
How do you get a ticket to the Wimbledon men's finals?
Yeah.
I mean, Pierce Bronson's there. You know, he's as cool as Paul Sweeney. I mean, he's just,
well, you guys can get in. You know, I can't even get in the parking lot.
You know, it's like celeb. Like everyone's like A-list,
and everybody looks smashing, all dressed up.
Smashing, you're all dressed up.
So it was good. I mean, Carlos Alcaraz was just amazing, heck of a player, just entering his prime here.
Yeah.
And Djokovic, I think passing the baton.
I went to the Open once to see Emma Raducanu, and I'm sorry, it was no fun. It was just absolutely packed with people. There was like 5,000 too many people there, or whatever.
But you went to the Open, though.
I went to the Open and had a great seat and all that. She went down in flames, but it was no fun because they were just maximizing ticket sales. I don't perceive Lisa, when you were at Wimbledon last, what was it?
My God.
Did you have the strawberries and crumpets or whatever it is?
Yeah, exactly.
There
Strawberries
you
and
go.
cream.
At Wimbledon, they're not selling merch, right?
They're selling merch. It's just not
Everybody's
as overt
selling
as
merch.
the US Open. But the U.S. Open does a good job. I go the first Tuesday every year at the U.S. Open.
Okay, so
in
you go
Queens.
when it's not like fancy.
Yeah, but it's the first Tuesday, the best day of matches. Everybody's practicing. Everybody's there.
Yeah.
Molly Smith,
Smart.
Bloomberg News, our U.S. economy editor. She is our expert on all things global.
Really?
trade.
I didn't
so
know
we'll
this.
We'll be talking to Molly.
There's a font of wisdom here.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we should road trip Wimbledon next year.
Can you see Lisa and Kate together? I can just see them
Oh,
talking
I
now.
Oh, yeah.
Jobbing with Kate.
Exactly.
Well, it's great to see her with
Yes.
this cancer treatment.
Yes.
must
A
be.
very
real
good.
emotional moment from New York City. Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have futures pointing to a higher open. NASDAQ futures up 0.5%. Dow futures, S&P futures up 0.4%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.46%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.24%. That's up 5 basis points. And you have the 30-year at 4.47%, and that's up 7 basis points. To commodities right now, we have spot gold higher at $2,418 an ounce. We have Brent crude $85 a barrel. WTI crude at $82 a barrel. Private prison operators, firearm-related companies, those are among the stocks rallying. And this, of course, after assassination attempts on Donald Trump. Private prison stocks like CEO Group, Core Civic up 7%. And you have gun stocks, Smith & Wesson brands up more than 4%. Few companies making news. Google parent Alphabet up 0.1%. Sources saying it's in talks to acquire cybersecurity startup Wiz for as much as $23 billion. And finally, Apple up nearly 2%. Sales in India actually hit a record of almost $8 billion in the 12 months through March. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, always brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers, they charge dollar margin loan rates from 5.83% to 6.83%. Rates subject to change. Learn more at ibkr.com/compare. Paul and I thank Interactive Brokers for foundational support of what we do here. I said to somebody 4 or 5 days ago, because he's so hard to get, I said, get Peter here. I mean, just get him in the studio. Let's go. And like everyone else, Paul, he's rewriting his strategy note for June 30. Things have changed. Here's Peter Scheer a week ago or so. The one thing that concerns me more than anything else about inflation is the increased risk of some sort of geopolitical event occurring. Well, you nailed it, except our geopolitics was Butler, Pennsylvania. How do you rewrite this trenchant note this morning?
Yeah, I think we continue to really think about how's the rest of the world viewing us, right? It's when we wrote that note, the assassination attempt had not even occurred. So this was just what's going on with Biden, what's coming up with the conventions. Now you've had this. I think the rest of the world has to be looking at the U.S. and saying, is there a degree of confusion going on here? Is there disorganization?
Right.
And will one of China, Russia, Iran, or someone do something?
I want to go to the heritage of Academy Securities, which is the Navy, the military of this nation. Your board is peppered with people with all sorts of blinking on their shoulders. The Guadalcanal Low is what I've always called it in speeches, was, I believe, December of 1942. And that's where we separated our geopolitics, the depths of the war after Midway, from our capitalism, which was then exceptional forward, as it is now. Can we do that here? Can we take the politics in an assassination attempt and separate it from our finance?
I think we can, though I think in the near term, there is some risk, right? We saw markets sell off a little bit last week. We saw some of this rotation trade. Do people say, hey, AI has had a phenomenal run. Do we take some chips off the table? Given everything that's going on, that to me seems somewhat realistic. And we have clearly been a huge beneficiary of foreign inflows, whether it's into the treasury market or whether it's into equities. And with the election coming up, with so much uncertainty around that, I could see those flows stopping or even seeing some profit taking.
So coming into an election here, how is the election calculus for investors? Has it changed over the weekend here?
For me, not really. I think we're too far away from the election to be betting too much of your positioning on the election. For me, everyone's decided that Trump's worse for deficits than Biden might be. I'm not so sure. I think both are going to be very bad for deficits, so I don't get too worried about that trade. And if you look even just what happened in Mexico recently, peso sold off. There was going to be all sorts of change. So far, there hasn't been much change. The peso's coming back down. So I think we have to get through. There's going to be a lot of rhetoric. There's going to be a lot of campaign promises. What can actually get done?
Right. How about earnings then? Let's focus on earnings. We really kicked off earnings late last week. Had Goldman Sachs today with a little bit better than expected numbers. What are you looking for from corporate America here?
So I think really, does the AI story stay intact, right? I think that's going to be the big thing. What do we see in terms of AI? Do we see it really, help this semiconductor companies? Does it continue to help the utilities? If we get any weakness in there, I think it drags down the broader market. Then separately, we're finally getting some life in the small caps, in the equal weighted indices. Do we get just enough earnings from there maybe to keep them good or even better?
Then the Federal Reserve. I mean, it seems to be set for the Fed to maybe cut as soon as September here. How important is that to this market?
I would be shocked if they don't cut in September. I think it would take a really big change in data. I'm still hopeful if we get enough weak data, or in terms of inflation, maybe July gets put back on the table. I think it's too late. But September, I think it's reasonably important to markets. But again, Thursday morning, if you told me that we were going to price in with certainty a September cut and then the NASDAQ would fall 2.5%, I would have got that one wrong.
But the answer is we all agree we need a correction. You're suggesting with our politics of the moment, the emotion of this assassination attempt, we could see a pullback. Isn't that what we want?
Yeah, and I think to me it's all going to be about momentum, right? When we look at it, whether it's the NASDAQ, whether it's the S&P 500, we think of these as these big, broad indices. The S&P, 11 companies make up 40% of the index. The NASDAQ 100 is more concentrated. So when people express their views now through these large ETFs, it really goes to such few stocks. It's been the momentum ones.
But what is your pullback? How do you frame the potential pullback?
I would say that we could see a 5 to 10% very rapid pullback led by the NASDAQ 100 with some support from the Russell 2000, but I think that would have to drop.
The VIX pops to 25, the VIX pops to whatever.
Yeah, 18, 20, somewhere in that sort of neighborhood.
That's normal, Peter Scheer.
Correct, and I think that would be very healthy. It would let people reevaluate where they want to put their bets, what they want to do. I think that's the opportunity.
A lot of folks, just in terms of the equity markets, I mean, if they haven't been in those Magnificent Seven, they haven't had really much performance at all. I mean, that concentration risk, how much of a concern is that for you?
It's a huge risk to me. And we pulled up the numbers this weekend. Of the S&P 500 stocks, the 250 smallest have a 0% average year-to-date total return.
This is really important. I was thinking of Meghdad Desai of London School of Economics, my great mentor over there, whose number one word in his economics is profit. Okay. To me, the partition of the Standard & Poor's 500 is nothing more than someone's measure of future profit. How many of those 500 really don't make the Peter Scheer profit test? The answer to me is a lot.
A lot, but on the other hand, you're paying such a small PE, like they don't have to outperform by much for those stocks to be really...
Okay, fine, but the fact is, how many stocks in your 500 S&P are not profit machines?
Unfortunately, fair number, right? But those are trading at, I'm a valuation sort of and contrarian.
So you're going to buy a 12 multiple right now?
I want to buy the S&P equal weighted or the NASDAQ equal weighted and be short the NASDAQ or the S&P against that. I think you are going to get this compression. It's starting to happen. We've got an over our skis on the one side, undervalue. And the thing is, those stocks now, if you look at the Russell 2000, they're so small, it does not take much of a flow to move those stocks higher. And I would argue liquidity, I think, has been abysmal for weeks, months. It's coming into July. And it always looks liquid because everything's algo and computer, blah, and we're getting all this trading. But the reality is there's no depth of liquidity.
I got to go to the memos at Academy Securities. What are your people writing about Taiwan and China right now?
So we think it's Taiwan and the Philippines has been more important. So our view has really been that China is not at all prepared to do anything militarily within Taiwan. That's years away if it's ever going to happen. Okay. They're going to put all sorts of pressure, but we're keeping a very close eye on what's going on in the Second Thomas Shoal. It's about 100 miles off the shore of the Philippines. They basically ditched a U.S. ship on a reef a long time ago.
Right.
China has been interfering with the resupply of that because China claims it's their territory. Philippines claims it's theirs. We actually have treaties with the Philippines. So if we're looking for an area where China might kind of, saber rattle or do something a bit more aggressive,
but we're going to build out there. I mean, we're going to take the Academy Securities U.S. Navy and create, off the top of my head, 3 or 4 bases all the way down to Palawan.
I think we're trying. I think the question that China is probably going to judge is, given everything that's going on domestically, do we have the will to be engaged somewhere else, right? We're already engaged with Russia and Ukraine. We're engaged with Iran, Israel. Do we have the willpower with everything that's going on and the leadership, and especially in this day and age with massive amounts of misinformation at the fingertips of our enemies?
Okay. This is great. So your pullback's a 5 to 10% correction.
That would be healthy for a lot of folks.
Well, yeah, it's about, I'm waiting.
Yes, we're
Peter
waiting.
Scheer, thank you so much with Academy and Securities this morning. The market not giving Scheer a correction. He wants futures up 24. Stay with us, please. From New York City on YouTube, on Apple CarPlay, on Android Auto. Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, back from Los Angeles. We welcome all of you to Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. After a weekend, a horrific weekend for the nation, a healing nation, as the former president, Paul, heals in Milwaukee. It was good to see him in the distance come off of his Trump jet yesterday, walking down the stairs, clearly with some control. He's on the mend.
He's on the mend. It's good news there. And again, Republican National, Convention is going to be in Milwaukee here starting today, and maybe kicking off some big news about a vice presidential candidate maybe to be named here. So
really
again,
front
we
and
have full
center.
coverage there. Yeah, exactly.
Joe Matthew with that report, and he didn't mince words. Today, you will find out a vice presidential candidate to go with Mr. Trump. We've got a great set of guests, a really important historian coming up here in moments from Bowdoin College, and we'll do that. And also, of course, we're looking at the markets. Goldman Sachs earnings show a continuation of the trend Mr. Solomon had 90 days ago. We'll get much more on that as it comes in. Goldman Sachs trading up and then leveling out here in the last half hour or so. Futures up 21. The VIX, I don't have a really good print yet, 12.88. Their yields are up. There was a buoyancy to the markets an hour ago. It continues, maybe a little bit off the ebb in the last 60 minutes, but futures up 21. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Rodeo Drive Mateo.
Good morning. Yes, back from Los Angeles. Markets reacting this morning. You were talking about it from the events over the weekend. We have the dollar rising. We have futures advancing. Thoughts Republicans return to the White House would bring in looser fiscal policy, so that's the reason for that. We have NASDAQ futures up about 0.3%. Same for S&P futures. Dow futures up about 0.4%. The 30-year yield actually rose above the 2-year rate for the first time since January. Right now, we'll check in with it. The 30-year at 4.47%, up 7 basis points. We have the 2-year at 4.46%. That's little change. The 10-year is 4.23%, and that's up about 5 basis points. The assassination attempt also pushing Bitcoin briefly above 63,000. Trump has positioned himself as pro-crypto. That's the reason for that. Right now, we have Bitcoin up about 4% at 62,518. Shares of Trump Media and Technology Group up about 47%. That's putting company on course to erase a 37% slump since the end of May. And bank reporting season rolls on. Goldman Sachs second quarter sales trading revenue topped estimates. Those shares right now, well, they're down about 0.1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Within this crisis that we see of violence and assassination attempt, we are drawing upon our great historians. And if I can paint this picture from Watergate in a book that was issued in my ute, Paul, Arthur Schlesinger did a book called The Imperial Presidency. It was hugely successful. Even his detractors had to read it. Going back, Paul, to James K. Polk and the stunning advancement of the presidency that we saw in the Mexican War, and then on to the uproar of Watergate. And then it's the toughest thing to do, to take a classic book like that and follow up with a sequel that was successful. Andy Rudalevige joins from Bowdoin, who had the courage to take on the imperial presidency with his classic, The New Imperial Presidency. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. With the shock of this assassination attempt, what does the next imperial presidency look like?
Well, that's a great question. Obviously, the shape of presidential behavior is going to still depend on who gets elected in November. I think, we can agree probably that the former president will get a political boost out of the week's events. But it is an institution that has just gotten stronger over time, partly because it has taken power, been ambitious in making claims about its own authority, and partly because Congress has tended to delegate a lot to it, right? They've kind of backed out of their own responsibilities in a lot of cases, and the president has stepped in. Whoever wins, I expect a more powerful president to continue.
With you as a true expert on this, can you imagine a Trump-Haley tandem? I mean, I think of Nixon-Agnew. I'm going to suggest they didn't get along, but can Trump-Haley occur in the Rudalevige mind?
I think it's unlikely, to be honest. There is one scenario. Let me circle back to it. I mean, So Nixon, picked Agnew sort of out of obscurity. Agnew was the governor of Maryland. He had impressed Nixon by being really tough on anti-war demonstrators during Vietnam. And it turned out that Agnew had not been vetted very well. He, of course, winds up having to resign because he took bribes, everywhere from being county executive up to being vice president.
No.
Piles of cash in paper bags on the desk of the vice president, right? So whenever we think we've seen something bad now, worse things have happened. Anyway, but with Trump and Haley, it's interesting because Haley, of course, wasn't even going to speak at the convention until a few days ago. She was his last, sort of standing competitor in the primary race, and they exchanged words, right? He attacked her. He attacked her husband, who was serving abroad in the military. She said he was, unfit, that he too was old and decrepit, bad as Biden in some ways, which is fighting words, of course, in the Republican Party. And so, it would be a shock to the system, I think. It's just very interesting to see how Trump will decide whether he needs to reset his campaign a little bit. I mean, J.D. Vance has gotten all the talk, right? And he's, of course, went on the attack immediately after the assassination attempts, effectively blamed the Democrats for it. Haley would be a different kind of pick, a more unifying pick, but does she want it, right? Does she want her star tied to President Trump, who,
in the speech rewrite, Paul, maybe we can get President Trump to say nattering nabobs of negativism.
Exactly.
We can see that.
So, Professor, Tom was referring to the imperial presidency, and we've seen claims by former President Trump that if he is reelected, that perhaps he will take that to a new level. How would you envision a second Trump presidency here, given that the odds from a lot of folks this morning are a little bit higher?
Yeah, well, he's made no secret about his desire to sort of make the executive branch a better instrument of his own will, right? I think he was frustrated in his first term. He kind of came in, of course, to office without any background of public service, didn't have a lot of people that he knew well as loyalists that he could appoint to various places. As we come, 9 years later from his first appointment, his first announcement back in 2015, he knows a lot more people. He has a better network of loyalists. He's got people he could put into office. And so, he's been talking about trying to bring the independent agencies, the regulatory agencies, better under his will. He's talked about using sort of a quirk in the civil service code to effectively fire a whole bunch of civil servants, maybe as many as 50,000 civil servants, and to put political appointees in their place to make those spots, less based on expertise and more based on loyalty to President Trump. And if we want to go back to the imperial presidency, that was a big part of what Schlesinger is writing about. The idea that there is not a check, even within the executive branch on the president. And when we add into that the president's stated desire to make the Justice Department an instrument of his, quote, retribution, unquote, this is what begins to get people nervous.
President Biden, what do you believe his response will be in the coming days and weeks here?
Yeah, well, I think it was appropriate for him to, obviously to denounce the assassination attempt, but also to reach out to call the former president to, speak a couple times now to a national audience about the problematic use of political violence and polarization. From Biden's point of view, of course, he wants to be able to focus, though, on the divisiveness of Trump. It's going to be hard, I think, for Team Biden to attack Trump as a person. I suppose the Republican National Convention this week, by putting Republican policies first and foremost, do offer a potential target, I guess, for the Biden administration so that they can, be sympathetic to, the former president as a victim of violence, but also, continue on the offensive to some degree.
Professor Rudalevige, thank you so much. At Bowdoin University is classic, the new imperial presidency. Andy Rudalevige, as we consider an assassination attempt on a former president. Futures up 24, Dow futures up 207. With our news in New York City, Michael Barnes.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. And following that attempted assassination on former President Trump over the weekend, President Biden calls for unity and peace as many worry about growing attacks leading up to November's general election.
While we may disagree, we are not enemies. We're neighbors. We're friends, co-workers, citizens, and most importantly, we're fellow Americans.
Meanwhile, FBI investigators continue their search into the suspected shooter, 20-year-old Thomas Crooks. His former classmates are speaking out, saying they are shocked that Crooks could commit such a horrifying act.
in my class, he didn't talk about politics. He kept to himself about that. And there was never anything negative that anyone had ever heard about him.
And more on the victim who was killed at the Trump rally in Pennsylvania. Corey Comparatori spent his final moments diving in front of his family to protect them from gunfire. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro says he had died a hero. Lawmakers gathered in Milwaukee in anticipation of today's start for the Republican National Convention, where Donald Trump is expected to receive the nomination for the GOP candidate for president. The former president says he's written his GOP convention speech to focus on national unity. Brown University political scientist Wendy Schiller says it's up to the convention now to determine whether this shift in tone lasts beyond this week.
Dave Clown's full support of their nominee. I think this absolutely solidifies not only the Trump base, but the Republican Party base. I think there'll be no dissenters. So there wasn't really before, but now they'll really come together. And it depends on whether this is a message of we can be strong leaders, look how strong our top the ticket guy is, or is it about sort of, retribution or, giving Trump all the power he ever wanted, those kinds of things.
Brown University political scientist Wendy Schiller. The convention runs through Thursday. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. It's going to be interesting to see how the GOP convention is covered. Everybody had plans, and I would assume everybody's going to put a little more energy into it than they did any other, the
timing
72 hours ago.
Yeah, the timing is extraordinary. So we have former President Trump in Milwaukee, and that'll kick off today. And as Joe Matthew was saying, maybe job one here today may be naming a vice presidential candidate.
We'll have to see on that. We have not had time to talk to Lisa Mateo about a great effort for Bloomberg LP. Seriously, folks, out in Los Angeles, greeting all sorts of journalists to be and giving them the wisdom of Bloomberg surveillance. What did you observe of Los Angeles, Lisa?
I thought Los Angeles was bustling. The restaurants there.
I thought the same thing, yeah.
All the places where we went out to eat, everything like that, everything was bustling. What I found amazing is that a lot of the students, because that's what we're there to, increase the amount of students that come here and are interested in Bloomberg, is that a lot of them are interested in radio. And I was very impressed by that.
And you said, no.
I said, don't do it. No, it was just very impressive to hear their backgrounds and to hear just their interest in it. And it was that really amazed me. So
Anybody
I was happy
wearing
for
a
that.
bow tie?
No, not yet. Your protege.
Lisa Mateo talking to the Ute of America. Stay away from radio. I'm kidding.
Podcast.
Futures up 25. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have futures still pointing to a higher open, and this is after an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Will it really spark thoughts that another Trump presidency could create a more expansive fiscal policy? Now, we have NASDAQ futures up 0.5%, Dow futures, S&P futures up 0.4%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.46%. That's little change. The 10-year yield at 4.24%, and that's up 5 basis points. We have the 30-year at 4.47%. And that's up 7 basis points. The stock 600, well, that's edging lower, down about 0.4%. The biggest drag coming from the luxury sector. You have Burberry shares down about 16% in London. It suspended dividends, replaced its CEO. Swatch, their shares down 10% in Switzerland. They also had a disappointing update. And then if you check in with other European luxury stocks, you have Kering down 3% in Paris, LVMH down 2% in Paris, and Richemont down about 3% in Switzerland. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. I don't even know where to begin with this because, the interns this year, I think, are pretty suspect. They sort of wander in at 6:30 and,
sure.
They're trying to look for an escape at 10:15. Adriana Lohengrin, the pandemic just didn't get in the way of her. She just rocked it out of Maplewood, New Jersey, internships at the Philadelphia Inquirer and
solid.
That. And the worst experience she had was, I think, for a cup of coffee. She was an intern for Tom Keene in Bloomberg Surveillance.
Oh, no.
She said her exit interview for Bloomberg, she said, I was the rudest person she dealt with. Hey, Adriana, what was it like being an intern for Bloomberg Surveillance?
That's a great question. I had a blast personally. But no, it's great to be back here. I went from helping book guests to now I'm here. So hopefully I can sound enough of an expert.
Well, it's a lot about those that talk and those that do. And Adriana Lohengrin out of Pennsylvania has really been doing well on our White House team and of course at Butler, Pennsylvania, to witness a tragedy for this nation. The last time I spoke to you, Adriana, you were in the Pittsburgh airport. You're now in Milwaukee, and it's changed Milwaukee. What can you report about Milwaukee, Wisconsin this Monday morning?
Right. So, I was up for a couple of hours this morning. When I left my hotel, not that many people out on the streets, but I was seeing a lot of Secret Service. And this is the security that was already, in the plans, as we knew there could be potential for protests, but you could tell the air, it's intense.
Well, have they extended the perimeter? The key thing I learned from Joe Matthew last night, seriously, are they going to extend the perimeter?
Yes, even getting an Uber, trying to come to the office space, it's about a 5-minute drive, and then you walk the rest of the 15 minutes. So,
So, Adriana, you were in Butler, Pennsylvania on Saturday. Can you just recount to us what those moments were like?
Absolutely. This was something that started off being so normal, in a sense, as normal as a Trump rally might seem to someone who's never been. But, people line up for hours in the heat, in the rain, if it's raining. But, for over the weekend, it was very sunny, very hot. There's music, there's dancing. People are getting excited. And he comes on. He's speaking. Everything seems normal for the first few minutes. And all of a sudden, things changed. But at first, what was interesting, it was just confusion as to how long, and how severe the situation was. Obviously, he was rushed off, but people were kind of waiting around, wondering, would he be back? So there was a lot of confusion as to what exactly happened and what the next steps were.
The Secret Service, I guess we've seen these kind of events probably more than we'd like to, but the Secret Service swarmed on to the president. How quickly did you and did people in the audience understand what was going on?
It took a few minutes. I still have my recordings from the event. People are in just utter confusion, utter shock. There were some officers who were trying to rush people and encourage people to leave quickly out the side entrance. But there were still so many people who were kind of lingering around, trying to get in contact with their family, figure out what was going on. There was, of course, no service. It was really hard to figure out. I'm trying to get in touch with my editors. People are trying to call everyone family. So it was really, it was something else.
Adriana, you've been following the Trump campaign for quite some time. I'm fascinated if you feel Mr. Trump's efforts forward are uniquely him and an exceptionally close group of people, or is there actually a campaign staff and bureaucracy around him?
Right. I mean, it's an interesting situation. Obviously, Trump decides, what he wants to do. He does have staff. I have different sources telling me different answers to the extent of which they're all in communication. For example, on something like the VP pick, which is something we are all waiting for eagerly. I have some sources telling me only he knows. He'll make the decision when he wants to. He might change his mind to throw us all off our game. So I'm hearing different things, but definitely in terms of something like the VP pick, it's up to him, and we'll see when he wants to do it.
Adriana, thanks so much for joining us again. Adriana Lowenkron from Milwaukee with the Trump campaign every day before this assassination attempt and now forward as well. Paul, I think we've got to get back to Goldman Sachs earnings. We've underplayed it here with this news flow. And the answer is the keyword profit.
Yep.
Goldman Sachs profit surges is the headline from Sri Natarajan. And the answer is, sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that. Maybe banking was a little bit off the mark. The trading unit. Explain to our audience what a, quote, trading unit is.
Yeah, they kind of, put it all together. Their fixed income, commodities, currencies, that FICC, F-I-C-C, is kind of the big driver for a lot of these big investment banks here today. So they had a very good quarter. The equity business also did well as well. So oftentimes, Tom, as you mentioned, it's one quarter to the next, 1 year to the next can be banking driven, advisory work, new issues. Other periods it can be trading driven, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing here because the banking environment, the banking activity across Wall Street has been pretty muted for the past several years. The expectation is, and what we hear from a lot of those Wall Street bosses, is that the trading, the investment banking pipeline, the pipeline is looking pretty solid on expectations that the Fed will cut interest rates. But right now, the traders kind of have the upper hand here in kind of driving these profits forward.
It's going to be interesting to see John Mahoney, with decades of experience at Goldman Sachs, brought up, I think as an older guy, as a strategic advisor. Again, I think is one of the little bit of a changes that we see at Goldman Sachs. Well, much more honest, Morgan Stanley. Rich, I believe Morgan Stanley's tomorrow, I'm guessing. I don't have it in front of me. And Bank of America. Thank you, Rich Truman, for that. Is well. Up 0.5% is the NASDAQ. And it's such a blur here that we haven't even talked, Paul. Apple, and this is some great reporting by Bloomberg off of regulatory filings in India. They're popping sales in India. The quote is 33%. And the stock it's up demonstrably.
Yeah, and this is, I think, one of the bull cases for a lot of the Apple investors saying, okay, we've got some headwinds in China. That's a problem because China's 20% of our sales. But we have yet to really, we being Apple, have yet to really penetrate in India, which could be a significant growth market for them. The question for Apple is, do they stick with their higher end phones, or do they introduce a product line that may be a little bit lower price? And they're sticking with their current product line. And as the Indian population continues to grow and increase in economic prosperity, they'll be their buyers.
His definitive book, Monsoon, out a decade ago, I'm thrilled to announce that Robert Kaplan will join us in the 9 o'clock hour. I can talk about any number of his books that were my book of the year, book of the summer, etc. But he is our arch geographer of international relations, and we'll talk to Robert Kaplan about the new geography of a Biden or Trump second term. Robert Kaplan to be with us in the 9 o'clock hour. Futures lift nicely, up 25. Small stocks, small cap, up 0.8%. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures advancing. Investors kind of increase their bets that Donald Trump could win the U.S. presidential election. We have NASDAQ Dow futures up 0.5%, S&P futures up 0.4%. The two-year yield, 4.45%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.23%. That's up 4 basis points. We have the 30-year at 4.46%, and that's up 6 basis points. Private prison operators, firearm-related companies, those are among the stocks rallying. Of course, this is after assassination attempts on the former president. You have private prison stocks like GEO Group, Core Civic up 7%. Gun stocks, Smith & Wesson brands up more than 6%. To earnings we go. We have BlackRock up 0.3%. It hit a $10.6 trillion asset record. And I want to check it back in with Goldman Sachs up 1%. Both fixed income and equity traders outpaced estimates. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. In all the news flow, and particularly the coverage from Milwaukee, we've forgotten about this being an incredibly busy economic week. Empire Manufacturing, okay, it's tertiary. Tomorrow, retail sales. Then we go into lots of housing data, industrial production. Later in the week, of course, claims always there with a 230,000 survey statistic. But just, we haven't said it, and I'm sorry, there's a lot of economic data to get us through to Friday, and then on to the Fed meeting, July 31. Our economic indicators always brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about our consultative support and technology. Thank you, Commonwealth, for your support of all of our economic indicators. Michael Pervis from up where the moose live. He's up in New Hampshire.
Wow.
I mean, the deer fly up there. They're like B-52 bombers at Camp Drum over in New York. Michael Pervis, I really just would like to talk about the extension of this great bull market. Is that what you model out into when the first leaves change in your New Hampshire?
Well, yeah, I think I think that the market is extraordinarily resilient right now. I've talked about I was at 5,400 for the S&P 500 from last December. I've talked about 6,000 being a realistic number to get to this year. We may even get past that. It's just, you have a few things. There's obviously a lot going on politically and geopolitically, but I think right now you're looking at basically the Fed has pivoted from a hawking stance to some sort of easing stance. We'll see what that really means, but it's certainly not it's certainly not a hiking stance. And you've got fantastic earnings, and you've got the rally, unlike so many rallies we've had over the last 12, 13 years, is really an earnings-driven rally, right? So if the earnings are growing in one particular sector group, it's going to go up. And if it's going up higher in another sector group, it's going to go up even more. I mean, so it's a very healthy, fundamentally driven rally as opposed to, let's get some PE expansion because the Fed's going to take interest rates down 200 basis points, as we saw, before COVID and during the earlier part of COVID.
Michael, how concerned are you about the concentration of performance in this market and with just a handful of stocks? And if you kind of look out beyond that, there's really not much performance at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a great question. I think the reality is that you've got the Mag 6, sometimes the Mag 7, depending on the day. There are fantastic earnings growth and fantastic returns, right? You've actually had PE compression in the Mag 6 this year. And if you look at the price earnings to growth ratios for the Mag 6, they are actually considerably more healthier than they are compared to, for example, the SPX equal weight index, right? So yeah, higher PEs, but much higher growth there. So again, that sort of says that if the Mag 6 are driving the overall equity returns, it's a really fundamentally driven thing. I'm much less concerned about the breadth issue there. Look, the SPX equal weight is up on the year, and their earnings are up on the year. It's just a lot smaller there. So I'm not really bothered by the breadth issue the way the textbook sort of tells us we're supposed to be in this respect. I just think it's a very unusual market structure where you've got 6 companies that are, effectively 40% of the market cap weighted S&P 500, and they're driving the bus, but the other ones are not. They're not growing as fast, performing as well, but I sort of who cares, right? If you have,
So where outside of these Mag 6, 7 names do you see opportunities here?
That's the hard part, because everyone's been sort of rah rotation there. I think it's you can rotate out of some overheated names like NVIDIA and stuff like that. But just to blankly rotate into, say, like this, the IWM, the small caps, or to the SPX equal weight, I'm not sure is a good strategy. I think the sectors that I particularly like, I think, continue to be in the metal space. I think there's opportunities in energy, and the beleaguered banking sector, sort of the Rodney Dangerfield of industry groups and for so many years, that's I think that's a place where I think we're going to start seeing some better returns there. But again, these rotations into these value and cyclical parts, you have to be sort of a nimble trader. It's not. I think you have to be very careful about your entry and exit points. If you had to put a gun to my head and say, okay, I can only buy one group of stocks for the next 3 years, I can't trade them. It's going to be the Mag 6.
Okay, well, this is right where I wanted to go. I mean, the bottom line is people, even if they're participating in this lift in the market, we're all sort of shell-shocked because we can't remember an extended bull market like this. What is the Purvis strategy for someone that has a 3-year perspective? You just said it. It's continue to buy Apple and the rest, right?
That's right. Yeah, I think you need to be allocated to equities, and I think you need to be allocated to where you're seeing the most probable earnings growth. And let's not forget, these giant tech companies have fantastic balance sheets that affords them the ability to do more stock buybacks. They're not as vulnerable to the economic vicissitudes. They have most of them have fantastic overseas exposure as well. So they're really fantastic business models that are, I think, with the AI theme, are going to be the most obvious beneficiaries of whatever happens in AI. I do think you have to be careful. Because they're so loved, they get overloved at times, and they get over. You can see the technicals, the RSIs on this getting overstretched, and then you can use those as tactical sell periods. But again, these are tactical short-term things. The broader trend here is that these stocks are going to outperform the broader index.
And for those of you not on YouTube, I mean, we got the casual Purvis.
Sure.
He looks like the keyboard player for the dead. Michael, you're up in New Hampshire. Okay, you're up in New Hampshire. And let's be honest here. Which canoe are you using this summer? Are you using the Merrimack canoe? 5,000 large, it's sort of holistic and nice, or do you got the old LL Bean aluminum going?
Tom, you're a New Englander. You should know better. The Old Town, a wooden canvas Old Town, is where you want to go.
You're doing it's like a John McPhee novel.
The survival of the bark canoe.
Yeah, the birch bark canoe. I mean, this guy's so granola. How many mosquito bites do you have now underneath the blazer you put on for 6 minutes?
We got up here Saturday, and I don't know. I've dozens, shall we say? But
dozens, shall we say? Michael Pervis, thank you so much. Use the Neatsfoot oil, and if that doesn't work, just spray some. Put some Budweiser on you. The mosquitoes won't hit you. Michael Pervis, thank you so much. Tallbacken Securities. Paul, you nailed us. We were talking as Pervis came in, and you said you wouldn't go up to New Hampshire. I grew up with all that.
I know.
If I never see another deer fly again, I'll be happy.
Yeah, they have their 2 months of summer, 2 months of non-winter, so they're going to take advantage of it.
True
they're
story.
Out all the time.
Me and a very affluent girlfriend, she had a BMW. I had nothing. And we had a BMW, drove up to Maine, near Bowdoin, where Rudalevige is, opened the door on May, got out, The black flies were so bad, we got back in the car and left Maine.
Yep, there
I mean,
you go.
it was that bad in the height of Maine. Michael Pervis doing the LL Bean thing up in New Hampshire.
Yep.
Merrimack canoes are very cool.
Nice,
Very
okay.
Because you could, come on.
Sure, absolutely.
Sneak into the reservoir at Central Park and on my Merrimack canoe. Michael Barr's going, no, he wouldn't. Delaware River. I could do the Delaware River. We'll have to see. Futures up 22 right now. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The investigation into a motive behind the assassination attempt remains a mystery as officials search through social media and the Bethel Park home of Thomas Matthew Crooks, the 20-year-old suspect killed by a sniper during Saturday's shooting at a Donald Trump campaign rally. In an Oval Office address, President Biden asked the nation to remain peaceful during this election cycle.
I want to speak to what we do know. A former president was shot, an American citizen killed, while simply exercising his freedom to support the candidate of his choosing. We cannot, we must not go down this road in America.
Attention now turns to the Republican National Convention going on as scheduled in Milwaukee, despite the attempt on Donald Trump's life. Bloomberg government's Zach Cohen is there and says he spoke with some delegates from Iowa.
This is a group of people who are excited to renominate somebody who supports their position as the first in the nation caucus state, but hanging over all of the preparations for this was this assassination attempt, and there were lots of mentions of this and hoping to galvanize supporters of former President Trump to continue to support his bid as well as Republicans down ticket.
Bloomberg government Zach Cohen reporting from the RNC in Milwaukee. It has been a week since Hurricane Beryl hit Texas, and nearly 300,000 homes and businesses are still without power in the Houston area. Governor Greg Abbott had some strong criticism for CenterPoint Energy.
Some power companies are not adequately prepared for a hurricane like Beryl. CenterPoint in particular has repeatedly failed to deliver power to customers for extended periods.
Governor Abbott says he's calling for an investigation. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, brought to you by Build America Mutual, insures U.S. municipal bonds that finance essential American infrastructure and provides guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Be part of building America. Invest in BAM Insured Funds. BAM, Build America Insured Funds. We thank them for the support. YouTube live chat, Michael Barr. This for you. Fired up. Michael, as well, in New Jersey, has an old town canoe used for sale.
Wow.
Paul, could you see Michael Barr on the Delaware River?
Delaware water gap.
The 15-foot,
I don't
8
even
inch.
like my bathtub. Now, why am I going to go on the Delaware River?
I'll let you have my surveillance floaties, but you got to. Lisa? What do you use for mosquito stuff?
Mosquitoes? I just use off. I use it
still using off
all the time. Almost.
Right. I use Beefeater. What do you use?
Exactly. They don't come near me. They know better. But Michael Barr, what he does, he floats down the Delaware River on inner tubes. He's got his, little cooler of beer next to him, floating next to him.
Yeah.
That's how you do it on the Delaware River. You float down the Delaware in your inner tube.
Anybody remember the old, used to be a product called Pick, and it used to be a spiral thing, and you would light it.
Oh, yes. It was
Yeah.
green. It was green.
And it would supposedly repel mosquitoes. Yeah.
Never worked.
All right.
No, I didn't.
All that stuff. And the chemicals back then, I think I've lost 5 years of my life from all the chemicals that we tried. Anyways, thank you so much, Michael. In New Jersey there, Michael Barr really considering it's $799. The 15-foot, 8-inch Old Town Discovery double ender canoe.
Nice.
Oh, you didn't
You and
mention that
Mrs.
part.
Barr on the river?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Floating down the river.
We'll have to see. Stay with us from New York City. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Dow futures leading the gains this morning, up 0.5%. NASDAQ futures up 0.4%. We have S&P futures up 0.3%. The 2-year yield at 4.46%, up 1 basis point. The 10-year yield, 4.23%, up 5 basis points. But the 30-year at 4.46%, up about 6 basis points. We have spot gold higher at $2,415 an ounce. Brent crude, $85 a barrel. WTI crude, $82 a barrel. On the economic calendar this week, a lot of eyes. Tomorrow's June retail sales. Wednesday, the Fed issues its Beige Book economic survey. Also this week, we have data on housing starts, also industrial production. More Fed speak expected today from Chair Jay Powell, San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly. A few companies making news. That would be Macy's, down 12%. Its board decided to terminate talks with Ark House Management and Brigade Capital Management. And on the flip side, some deal-making news. Cleveland Cliffs has agreed to buy Stelco Holdings. We have Cleveland Cliffs down about 3%, but Stelco Holdings up 1% in Canada. And news from Boeing. Years of setbacks. The company has started test flights of its 777-9 aircraft with FAA certification. Boeing shares up about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa Mateo. Greatly appreciate it. There's all sorts of preparation for doing great journalism. And with Kate Ackley, it's just simple. She was shining at CQ, Congressional Quarterly in Washington, and we're thrilled she's with Bloomberg Government. But, Paul, you got to understand that the way you go into journalism out of the University of Colorado Boulder is over Coors beer at the Sink.
Yep.
I mean, you go to the Sink, which is this iconic bar in Boulder, and one day you say, I'm going to be a journalist in Washington, and that's what Kate Ackley did. She joins us now from Milwaukee. Go Buffaloes. Kate, you know, I look at where we are after this horrific event, and everything changes. But for you reporting from Milwaukee, what won't change after what we witnessed this weekend?
Well, we're still here. We're on the ground. We went through with all of our flights, and I talked to a lot of sources yesterday. I was texting and calling people just to make sure, you know, that people's plans basically stayed the same. And everybody that I talked to was saying they were still getting on their flights. They're here now, or some are coming in. You know, people will sort of trickle in throughout the week. You know, people will come and go depending on their plans. But you know, with very few exceptions, people said they were here with resolve.
Do they want, Kate, the same message that they expect from the former president, or do they want a new message from Donald Trump?
Well, I think they're going to get a new message from Donald Trump. And, you know, that's the reporting out last night and today that former President Trump had a speech that he was going to tear up. And that's what we'd heard from other speakers or just people who are hosting events off the floor. I mean, there's obviously the official convention happening where we, you know, the televised speeches, but there's tons of events all over the Milwaukee area, which we're going to be covering all week. And even some of the tenor and tone of those events, I think will change. But we're going to be watching. You know, the President Trump, others have said they are going to, you know, rip up their speeches, change their tone, and we're going to see over the next 4 days, is that the reality?
So, Kate, is there any reason to believe that former President Trump will change, I don't know, his actions, his rhetoric that had been, you know, very aggressive as it relates to the Democratic Party and President Biden, or, you know, will it be the same here? Is there any sense that he's going to change tact here at all, given those amazing events from over the weekend?
Well, that's what his campaign is signaling. That's what he said in an interview last night, that, you know, he is going to take on a more, you know, message of unity. We'll see how that, you know, what does that sound like? How do we, how does that go? Does that get put into action? That's all, you know, stuff that we'll have to watch. The news that we've been waiting on, you know, really for days or weeks is who is the Republican vice presidential pick. And does that signal anything?
Okay.
That could come as soon as today.
Yeah, I mean, come today, Kate, but this is really important because you're iconic for just getting on the phone and talking to a zillion people. Who do the delegates want as VP? Not who does Donald Trump want, But who do 1,100 bodies on the floor want?
I mean, you can do a poll of these folks. I can tell you the people that I talk to, there is a sort of a sense that it will be J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio. I think you talked to delegates. I talked to some delegates in the airport yesterday. We were waiting for our luggage. We were on, delayed flights. It was hot. People have their favorite picks. People coming from all over the country. We've got people from Texas and Alaska, all 50 states. But, it's really down to Donald Trump's decision. So whether who they want, I think they're going to get on board with whoever the pick is. But of course, people are going to have their favorites. But I heard a lot of people that I talked to saying that they thought it would be Vance.
Kate, to what extent do you think that the assassination attempt from this weekend will be front and center at the convention? Will it just be something that's in the background? How do you think the president and the folks in his campaign are going to handle this?
Well, already I'd say it's both. It's definitely in the background. You walk around Milwaukee, I saw just literally hundreds of police. I saw them on bicycles. I saw them walking around, putting up extra barriers around the perimeters or different perimeters. So you can't sort of walk around and not think about it. So it's clearly in the backdrop. But what we've heard is that everybody from former President Donald Trump to people speaking at little events, in hotel ballrooms and restaurants that people have rented out, that people are taking their remarks back to the drawing board.
You won one final question, Kate Ackley. You won a hugely prestigious award from the National Press Club in Washington for saying, hey, this is not about guys in suits and ties. It's about women donating to politics. And that means Nikki Haley. How will Nikki Haley be greeted by the delegates in Milwaukee?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. That's a kind comment. I looked at the 2017-2018 election cycle way back when, as then President Trump was having his first couple years in office, and we saw a big rise in women political donors in mostly opposition to Trump, right? And so that has continued, but now he's going to be talking more this message of unity. Does that bring in, more women into the fold? You mentioned Nikki Haley. She was not expected to speak at this convention, and now she is.
Why? Why did that occur? You're the pro on this, Kate Ackley. Why did that event occur?
I think it's a part of this message of unity, that this is now a unified party, and they're going to even try to unify the country, a very tall order in these political times.
Kate, I opened up with Boulder. I got to ask, for David Gura, he just sent me an email. Kate, did you really go to the sink in Boulder?
I have been to the sink. I my sophomore year, I lived about 2 blocks from there.
There you go. That's way cool. That's very good. Kate Ackley.
I've got a Buffs hat. Like if my arm were twice as long, I could grab it and show you. I got my Buffs hat right here in Milwaukee.
Very good. Kate Ackley, thank you. Go Buffaloes. Out of Boulder, and of course with CQ and Iconic with Bloomberg Government as well. Really important work on women and donations. It's underplayed today. It's in the zeitgeist. I'll get it, Paul, but I'm sorry. Nikki Haley speaking to Donald Trump's Republican convention. Things changed with this tragedy this weekend.
Things changed with this news over the weekend here. And so, again, as Kate Ackley was suggesting, most speakers here are going back to the drawing board in terms of kind of what they were prepared to speak at the convention. That probably includes the president as well.
Program note, Lisa Mateo. Just what you can learn out on YouTube. For mosquitoes, Avon's Skin So Soft.
Yes, I love that.
Does it really work?
It all the time. Yes, it really does. It's a very strong smell, so if you're okay with it, but it really does work. That and the off. And someone said something else on YouTube. Thermacell? I haven't heard that one, but I got to check that one out too.
Some guy tried Tanqueray gin and that didn't work. Didn't work. Thank you for the support on live chat. Appreciate that. This morning, all of you really across the nation and worldwide as well. A lift to the market, it is sustained. We were up 24, 25 earlier, up 22 now, 0.4%. The VIX, elevated, odd market, 12.94. On the VIX, the 10-year yield, 4.23%. Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney, our world headquarters in New York with Michael Barr and Lisa Mateo in this hour, our continuing coverage of an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. The former president is in Milwaukee of some health, we are told by a reporter there. Thanks, Kate Ackley, for being with us moments ago with her many contacts and sources in Milwaukee in the last 24 hours. Paul, our team has done, I have goosebumps over what we had. Andrew Rudalevige with us from Bowdoin in the last hour, coming up, the definitive guy on the history of assassination attempts in America, Ron Feynman of Florida Atlantic, and then Robert D. Kaplan will join us as well. Just solid. That's exactly right. Let's get through this so we can get to Professor Feynman very quickly. A lift to the market. Paul, one word on Goldman Sachs. What do you see?
Pretty solid results, Tom. I mean, again, the banking business is not there for the street where they'd like to see it, but the traders came through this quarter.
Traders came through and saved the day. Another good quarter, at least, for Mr. Solomon. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning, and markets reacting to the events over the weekend. The dollar stronger, futures advancing. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.4% right now. Dow futures up 0.5%. S&P futures up 0.3%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.46%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.23%, and that's up 4 basis points. We have the 30-year at 4.46%, up 6 basis points. The assassination attempt also pushed Bitcoin briefly above 63,000 as Trump has positioned himself as pro-crypto. So right now we have Bitcoin up 4%, 62,675. Crypto-related stocks seeing a boost too. We have Coinbase Global up 4%, Marathon Digital Holdings up 9%. Shares of Trump Media Technology Group up 52%. And yes, big bank reporting season, it does continue. We have Goldman Sachs up about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thank you so much, Lisa Mateo. The book is 274 pages. And it is a book of pain and agony for this nation. It took a lot of courage to write. Ron Feynman at Florida Atlantic University on his classic Assassinations, Threats in the American Presidency. Professor, thank you so much for joining this morning. The grief I see is 14 chapters from Andrew Jackson to Ronald Reagan. You've got to write a new chapter. How is this assassination attempt the same or different from the other 13 you write about?
Thank you for inviting me, first of all. I would say that it stands out that I've told my students in my class at Florida Atlantic University, I've been talking about this in past terms, and I said the last direct attack on a president was Ronald Reagan in 1981. I said it's now 43 years, and it worries me because I said, unfortunately, I think the odds are catching up. And unfortunately, They did occur 36 hours ago. I think it sobers people a great deal to realize that we have so much violence in this country and so much violent rhetoric that I think unfortunately helps to provoke this.
Right. Unfair question, but I got to go there. How do presidents change who survive an assassination attempt? I mentioned your chapter on Andrew Jackson yesterday on our coverage. Okay, that's a few years ago. But can Donald Trump learn from Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, or Ronald Reagan of how to move on?
I'm hopeful he'll be able to. I think that it definitely had an effect on Ronald Reagan, and I think, well, Nixon only had a short period of time left in office when he, as far as, but I do think I'm hopeful that Donald Trump, based on what he's been saying since the unfortunate situation, I'm hopeful that his speech at the Republican convention will be different than it might have been, and I'm hopeful it will change the nature of the campaign. I'm hopeful, but can't be certain what will happen because there is so much ugly rhetoric out there on both sides.
And Dr. Feynman, you refer to the ugly rhetoric, and I guess what's different today versus years ago, however far back you want to go, with social media, and it just seems to amplify both sides of any given argument.
Social media is a double-edged sword. It's great and it's horrible. Yes.
So what extent do you think that is a challenge for, trying to deal with this type of violence?
It's a major challenge because we have a lot of rumors online already, conspiracy theories and that kind of a thing, and it's very troubling. And you get the feeling that there are those out there that are saying we have to get revenge on the other side of the spectrum because of what happened.
This is a really important question. You have a brilliant chapter that would surprise any of our listeners, those that are students of history or not, on Huey Long of Louisiana. And I guess you could also mention George Wallace as a candidate in 1972.
And Robert Kennedy also.
Right.
People who were not president, yes.
But with Huey Long, who I think is really unknown within the American zeitgeist right now, what can Donald Trump learn from the stridency of Huey Long that he needs to avoid going forward?
Well, Huey Long, I think, was seen by many people as a real danger and threat at the time because he had his own so-called stormtroopers around him that were there to protect him. And yet the belief is that it's very possible that one of his so-called stormtroopers may have killed him by accident. There's still debate about whether Dr. Carl Austin Weiss really did kill him, or wound him, and then he died 2 days later. And he was killed at the time. So it's a big mystery still about Huey Long. We're not really sure what the truth is.
So, Dr. Feynman, what do you expect to hear from President Trump, I guess, at this national convention in Milwaukee? Boy, the timing could not be more unique, I guess, given what happened over the weekend. What do you expect to hear?
Well, he's talking about unity. I'm very happy to hear that he says that. He's changing his speech a great amount and talking about unity. The question is, though, will those people around him at this week's convention do the same thing? And what will happen once the convention is over? That's what worries me.
Professor, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I really can't say enough about the effort, folks. It's a book of pain. Assassinations, Threats in the American Presidency, from Andrew Jackson to Barack Obama. Ron Feynman, it's just 13 really difficult chapters about this violence in America. When this happened, John Farrow called me. That's how I found out about this.
Okay.
I'm sitting on Saturday, and Farrow says, "Look at CNN."
Yeah.
And it was breaking. And I had forgotten, Paul. I'm supposed to be pretty good at this. And I had forgotten we focus on those that died.
Mm-hmm.
But when you add up, as Professor Feynman does, the assassination attempts where they survive, it really speaks to the violence within our politics.
Yeah, and you think about the Secret Service and all the support that presidents and ex-presidents have in terms of Secret Service defense and support. Still, these things can happen.
Can we touch on the markets now before we get to Robert T. Kaplan?
Absolutely. We actually
Apple.
I'm
sorry. Apple is, some people out on YouTube live chat saying, look, this is like a Dan Ives market.
This is.
And Morgan Stanley with a lift.
Yep.
And also our Bloomberg reporting that they did better than good in India. I
Yep.
mean, what do I know about India?
Exactly. But again, I think the story on India was, to what extent can India replace to some degree the growth story that had been China for the last 15, 20 years for Apple. Again, some headwinds for Apple in China, but they continue to still put up some solid numbers in China. But people have certainly been looking to India as the new growth driver for just, the unit sales, phone sales, blocking and tackling for Apple.
We can touch on that with Robert T. Kaplan as well. What we're touching on now is a data check as we try to get to Michael Barr. He's looking at canoes for the Delaware River. Futures up 24. NASDAQ up 0.4%. Small caps lead the way up 0.8%. The VIX 12.92. Dollar dynamics are interesting. It's really interesting to see futures open in Japan last night and to see the uncertainty there, a little bit of a better tone, but a much better tone right now in terms of the linkages, the correlations of equities, bonds, currencies, and commodities. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The investigation into a motive behind the attempted assassination on former President Donald Trump's life remains a mystery. Officials are searching through social media and the Bethel Park home of Thomas Matthew Crooks. The 20-year-old suspect was killed by a counter sniper in Pennsylvania. FBI Special Agent Kevin Rojek.
At present, we have not identified an ideology associated with the subject, but I want to remind everyone that we're still very early in this investigation.
Meanwhile, in an Oval Office address, President Joe Biden asked the nation to remain peaceful during this election cycle after the Trump assassination attempt at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania.
You know, the political record in this country has gotten very heated. It's time to cool it down.
The Secret Service is coming under intense scrutiny after the attempt on former President Trump's life. President Biden says he's called for an independent review of security at Saturday's rally. Former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton says the president is right to do so.
We're fortunate that Trump was only wounded. It's a tragedy that one of the spectators was killed, but we need to do the review of this in a calm way. I think do it quickly as well, because there are already conspiracy theories about what happened on Saturday that I think are Looney Tunes, but I don't think they're going to go away until we have an independent, objective review.
Former White House National Security Advisor John Bolton was a guest on Bloomberg Surveillance. Activists in Milwaukee for the first day of the Republican National Convention say they'll stick with protest plans for marches and rallies in the wake of what happened over the weekend. The activists are hoping to call attention to issues such as abortion rights, economic justice, and the war in Gaza. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom Paulisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. We'll have our continuing coverage here of the politics of Milwaukee as well. And so much of it, Paul, besides Milwaukee, is the idea of getting on to Chicago. I think we've underplayed today. Do you remember, I think it was 72 hours ago, the uproar in the Democratic Party?
Sure.
It's sort of drifted away.
It's drifted away.
But it's not. It's still there.
It's still there. And, presumably, and once we get past this Republican convention, the Democrats can kind of coalesce and kind of see where the sands are and where they go from here, because I think there's still questions as to, where the Democratic Party wants to be when they get to Chicago in terms of who their candidate is and to what
in the timeline.
Yeah.
And what I would suggest in the old days, we could talk to Matthew Winkler about this, scheduled to be with us, but in the old days it was a courtesy to go radio silent when the other guys had a convention, and you gave all your staffers the week off essentially.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that exists anymore.
I don't know. We'll have to see how it plays out, because, again, the dynamics from the weekend with the assassination attempt kind of puts, a new spin on this thing. And, again, the president came out talking about unity, as did former President Trump. We'll see if that gets reflected in some of the news and the speeches coming out of Milwaukee.
Our framework in Milwaukee, Joe Matthew, Kate Ackley leading our coverage there, balance of power. But I do want to say that we have a lot of market gyrations into earnings season. Goldman Sachs today, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America tomorrow, and also a raft of economic data through the week. It is a constructive market. Futures lift up 22, the VIX under 13, 12.93. The Paul Sweeney yield, the 2-year yield 4.46%, the 10-year yield 4.23%. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures advancing. Dow futures leading the charge up about 0.5%. We have NASDAQ futures and S&P futures up 0.3%. The 2-year yield at 4.45%. That is little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.22%, and that is up 4 basis points. Commodities, want to check in with spot gold higher at $2,413 an ounce. Brent crude, $85 a barrel. WTI crude, $82 a barrel. Companies making news. That's Google parent Alphabet. Sources say it's in talks to acquire cybersecurity startup Wiz for as much as $23 billion. Their shares down about 0.2%. Apple up nearly 2%. Sales in India actually hit a record of almost $8 billion in the 12 months through March. And finally, AT&T down 0.3%. A hacker said the company paid about $400,000 to erase stolen, sensitive call and text log data. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. This is our conversation of the day on an assassination attempt of Donald Trump. Robert D. Kaplan is absolutely definitive. The arch answer is the geography of our international relations. It's widely understood that The Loom of Time was my book of the year last year, stretching from Morocco over to the various stands. But there's another book, which is the book to read if you are shaken by violence in America, The Tragic Mind. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. I want to talk about a single half sentence in your book, The Semblance of Order. Have we lost our semblance of order?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. We're losing it, as I would say. That's where we are. But keep in mind, historically, America is a very young democracy, only 250 years old, 1/3 of the time of the Moorish occupation of Spain, and it has been very tumultuous. We have had 4 successful presidential assassinations, remember. Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy. And we've had several other attempted assassinations of presidents and former presidents. So this is not completely unusual in American history. So I would ask people to calm down. I mean, a mass democracy is by definition tumultuous, especially in a social media age.
And Robert, a lot of folks were saying, boy, the divisions in this country over the last, 4, 5, 6 years, whatever time period you want to say, boy, seem as bad or maybe even worse than the 60s. But I remember, in the 60s, again, as you know, assassinations were just much more frequent and much more problematic than we've had here. I'm not sure if this weekend changed that.
No. I do not know either. Keep one thing in mind, though, historically speaking. Assassinations are very tragic affairs in this sense. Had Kennedy not been assassinated, given his thinking up until that point, he was becoming more and more skeptical of our involvement in Vietnam. We may not have had the Vietnam War with 500,000 troops deployed as we did, and with it, all the divisions that it caused in American society for decades afterwards. It really did move history on a different pivot by moving from Kennedy, who is a genuine war hero and expert in foreign policy, to Johnson, who is a neophyte in foreign policy. So without the Lincoln assassination, civil rights might have come 50 years sooner. So these are big things.
Right. So social media, you mentioned it earlier, Robert. What role does that play? And is there any defense against that dissemination of information and misinformation?
Well, a print and typewriter age was about moderation because you had to argue out complex issues at length with fact-checking. So it enabled moderation. Social media enables the extremes. It's about passion. and shortness. And passion and shortness are the enemy of analysis. So social media is one of the main drivers behind the polarization in the country, behind both political parties moving further to their own extremes. It's harder and harder to keep a mass democracy at peace in a social media age.
Robert Kaplan, we were talking yesterday in our special coverage of any number of presidential pairings, and one of them we came up with was Nixon and Spiro Agnew, the governor of Maryland at the time, completely obscure as well. And there was an idea of a silent majority. Does Robert D. Kaplan discern a silent majority in America today?
Yes, I do. It's not large in a numerical sense, but it's large in an electoral pivotal sense. Because we're so divided, there are only about 5 or 6 swing states now. There used to be a dozen, because the other states, the other 45 states or so, are all already spoken for to a significant extent. So even though we're increasingly divided, it's going to be silent swing voters, maybe totaling 100, 200,000 in those 5 states that are going to determine the election.
Do you have any idea? I'm thinking of your blistering essay in the Washington Post about Trump foreign policy and the Trump reach across the Pacific to China. Will this assassination attempt give us a new Donald Trump? Do you have any wisdom on that?
No, not really. Trump is he's a character out of Shakespeare, even if he's never read Shakespeare. But I don't know. He's pretty aggressive towards China. And keep in mind that the actions between the U.S. and the Chinese are getting more and more aggressive. And that is dangerous, because this is what happened before the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was only after the Cuban Missile Crisis, after both superpowers stared into the abyss, that they went on to have détente and strategic arms limitation treaties and all of that stuff. So what we need is a real cooling of relations between the U.S. and China. I mean, cooling down the rhetoric.
People ask me what I'm going to read. I'll tell you what I'm going to read next. I got a stack of books going on right now, and off of this assassination attempt, Paul Sweeney, I have to pull an Audible, Surveillance Audible. The Tragic Mind, Fear, Fate, and the Burden of Power. Robert T. Kaplan, Yale University Press. It is definitive, back to the Greeks and Romans on violence and tragedy of our interesting politics. Robert T. Kaplan, thank you so much for joining us today, of course, at times with Eurasia Group and Ian Bremmer's shop as well, many other affiliations. His book, my book of the year, I should say, last year, The Loom of Time, can't say enough about it. It's amazing to me, Paul, to see, as President Biden a number of days ago in another world spoke 90% of his comments were on foreign policy. I don't think we're going to see that with President Trump. We're going to see a domestic agenda, I'm guessing, in Milwaukee.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see kind of how the message has changed or has not changed coming out of the former president and the campaign here I'm guessing, as we're hearing some of the reporting from Bloomberg News coming out of Milwaukee, that in fact it will change. It is being changed as we speak, as is being rewritten here, taking into account the events of the weekend.
Our reporting, I don't think we're going to get it at 10 o'clock today, the Paul Sweeney Hour. Bitcoin covered heavily in the 10 o'clock hour here, up $3,000, 63,000 rounded up on Bitcoin, a constructive number of days for the currency. I'm being charitable there. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, traders thinking that former President Trump, he's positive on crypto. That could be good for
later in the day. We may get a vice presidential announcement.
Yes,
always exciting.
Exactly. So we'll see that coming out of Milwaukee.
We need to get the markets open for you. Futures up 24. It is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. So how are the markets going to react after a weekend of headlines, the assassination attempts of former President Donald Trump? Before the bell, we've seen futures advancing. We've seen the dollar stronger. The 30-year yield rose above the 2-year for the first time since January. Let's see how things kick off for the new trading week. We'll start with the S&P 500 up about 0.4%, 22 points at 5,637. The Dow up 0.6%, 238 points, 40,245. And we have the Nasdaq up 0.4%, 89 points at 18,487. We have the 2-year yield at 4.45%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.22%, and that's up 3 basis points. Want to touch on the 30-year yield? 4.45%, and that's up 5 basis points. Commodities, we have spot gold higher at $2,415 an ounce. Brent crude $85 a barrel. We have WTI crude at $82 a barrel. And at the open, want to check in with Goldman Sachs after it reported a surge in earnings in the second quarter. Right now, those shares up about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Our light's regularly scheduled on a Monday morning, and with Matthew Winkler, that means he and Shin Pei have done a tour de force on surprises as identified by the market. Their surprise is South Africa. They have a wonderful essay with all sorts of informative data and charts. It's called Show Don't Tell. And the answer is, I'll put it out on Twitter and LinkedIn. We rip up the script with the founder of Bloomberg News, Matthew Winkler. You gave me the opportunity, not once but twice, to interview Robert Remini about one of Donald Trump's heroes, Andrew Jackson. There's a stridency there, some would say an undemocratic tendency of the general from Tennessee. Will Donald Trump change, Matt Winkler, with this assassination attempt?
Always great to be with you, Tom. What an introduction. Since you're invoking history, I think we ought to, in fact, remember what the record shows, which is that in almost every instance where there's been an attempted assassination, whether it's FDR in 1933 or even Theodore Roosevelt a month before the election, before him. More recently, in the 70s, there were 2 attempts on President Gerald Ford, and of course, that was followed by the attempt on Ronald Reagan. None of those events actually changed, if you will, the outcome, whatever the outcome turned out to be or was perceived to be. Ronald Reagan did get a boost in the polls, but then became very unpopular after that. It didn't help Gerald Ford get elected against Jimmy Carter, and Theodore Roosevelt certainly didn't benefit from having a bullet in his chest when the election occurred. So we have to be careful. Look at the historical record. The historical record says that these assassination attempts, so far at least, none of them were significant.
How do you think former President Trump, in Milwaukee this week, the timing is just extraordinary. How do you think President Trump will incorporate what happened over the weekend into what we see and hear from Milwaukee?
Well, actually, there seems to be a cognitive dissonance between Trump and his party. His party right away immediately assailed Biden, of all people, for this attempted assassination. The person who tried to kill Trump doesn't fit in any way the persona of somebody who is in any way affiliated with Trump's opposition. In fact, just the opposite. He looks like a character right out of all these terrible school shootings we've had, 20 years old and not particularly well-adjusted, so to speak. Yeah. So Trump himself has said he's going to rip up his script and write a unifying speech, which is at odds with what Governor Abbott of Texas has already said, what the senator from Ohio has already said, Vance. They have been actually exacerbating tensions and violence. Biden, in his address to the nation, said, let's take the temperature down. It doesn't matter who we are. We all need to cease and desist.
Matthew Winkler with us, the founder of Bloomberg News, emeritus editor-in-chief, of course, out with an essay today, which we'll get out on South Africa. How did New York State become a purple state? I don't think we've reported that yet, but it's in the zeitgeist.
Actually, I think you have to, again, be careful, Tom, about zeitgeist and vibes and all of that.
I'm just getting him going here. It's Monday. We got to get Winkler.
If we look at votes instead of polls, the polls have not been particularly informative. The voting so far in all the special elections we've had, right up to the present, have suggested that Americans are against gun violence overwhelmingly. Americans are for reproductive rights overwhelmingly.
So does Trump have to go to Haley with this announcement? Someone, Kate Ackley of Bloomberg News, reporting that we may see that as much as today.
Well, far be it from me to be a political commentator in that respect. I would just say if you look at what people do as opposed to what they say, you get a very different report card on where we are. And even, by the way, in this media frenzy about Biden that preceded the assassination attempt, it wasn't clear at all that the public was with the media, so to speak.
I told you once you invented Twitter. The Bloomberg headlines were magical. Then they had this crazy thing which make one a red one called a red sticky if it's important. Twitter. Do you feel like you helped create the modern media and the media frenzy? How do you feel about that?
So, Tom, it takes a village, but I will say this. At Bloomberg, thanks to our owner and his very far-sighted view about data, we were in a position to be the first word, the fastest word, the final word, and the future word, all in one, very early on in our infancy as a news organization.
I did this. Lucas Shaw, Paul, jump in here, please. Lucas Shaw, in The Frenzy, as Mr. Winkler talks about, he's a great Hollywood axe, said, would everybody stop tweeting? I retweeted. I did nothing this weekend on Twitter. I went essentially radio silent. And the bottom line is Lucas Shaw, with a primal scream out of L.A., said, would everybody just stop tweeting? It was that out of control.
Exactly.
Paul, jump in here with Matt Winkler.
Matt, for better or worse, I guess the news from the last 36 hours has taken the lens off of President Biden and off of the Democratic Party. How do you think, as they get ready for Chicago, they think about who their candidate will be? Where are we in that discussion?
I think it's totally confused, actually, because we don't even know who the vice presidential candidate is at this point. And as I said earlier, you have Trump saying he's going to rip up the script and come up with something that's called unity, and that's completely at odds with where the most vocal acolytes for Donald Trump are right now in their public statements, which are incendiary. So I think it's a very confused thing. The one thing I will say is I'm glad that Milwaukee's going to get the benefit of all this business. It's good for Wisconsin.
One final question here, Matt Winkler. You've lived Ohio. You're a kid from the East, but forget about it. You lived it at Kenyon. And if you look at Pennsylvania and then out to Kenyon and out into Ohio, he's got to be very shrewd to win those states against President Biden or whomever. Are those red states now?
Well, they are. Well, Pennsylvania is not a red state. It's a blue state. You just have to look at the governor and everybody else on down. Ohio is a red state, almost completely, except for Sherrod Brown, who is a Democrat. Again, I would hesitate to make a conclusion, except to say that if you look at the most recent polling, Ohio, against all kinds of opposition, enshrined reproductive rights in its constitution, voted for it. The people of Ohio, so that's Republicans and Democrats. That was the biggest, if you will, vote.
Shinpei just emailed me and is furious we didn't talk about South Africa. Come back and we want to talk. You had a huge response in Europe and across all of EMA to the Matt Winkler column on the success of South Africa's recovery, political recovery here, is seen by the bond market. Comments from Matthew Winkler. He's the emeritus editor-in-chief, founder of Bloomberg News. The green on the screen, there's no question about that. Dow leading the way up 0.7%. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. People are gathering for the first day of the Republican National Convention. Bloomberg's Joe Matthew is in Milwaukee.
We are expecting some news today on a running mate, which is going to be another layer here to this whole conversation. And there will be some business had today. Delegates are in town not just to applaud politicians and get together and have steaks and drinks at night, but they're actually going to have roll call votes on the party platform. That's the first time since 2016 that will be happening, as well as entering names in a nomination. And that's why we expect some news on a running mate later on.
Bloomberg's Joe Matthew. This is on the heels of Saturday's assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. President Biden called to lower the temperature. In an Oval Office address, President Biden asked the nation to remain peaceful during this election cycle, calling for unity and voicing his worries following the assassination attempt.
An intimidation on election officials, or the kidnapping plot against the sitting governor, or an attempted assassination on Donald Trump. There is no place in America for this kind of violence, or for any violence ever.
Meanwhile, the investigation into a motive behind the attempt remains a mystery as officials search through social media and the Bethel Park home of Thomas Matthew Crooks. The 20-year-old suspect was killed by a counter-sniper. It has been nearly a week after Hurricane Beryl hit Texas, and PowerOutage.us says nearly 300,000 homes and businesses are still without power. Texas Governor Greg Abbott had some strong criticism for CenterPoint Energy.
The failure of power companies to provide power to their customers is completely unacceptable. Power companies along the Gulf Coast must be prepared to deal with hurricanes, to state the obvious.
Governor Abbott says he's calling for an investigation. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Who's the greatest pinata we deal with besides Lisa Mateo? I mean, and the answer is the colorful one, D. Ives. I mean, Gene Munster's optimistic on Apple, but, Gina's rational. Ives, less so. Moonshot, Apple, from when the Red Sox were playing under 500 ball, at 42%.
Yeah, extraordinary.
Did I just say that?
You did.
42%.
Yeah, it's just...
And up $5 today, whatever.
Yep.
I just, Paul, the character of this bull market, just extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the market cap that this stock
has
created.
When is, I'll do the math, folks.
You do the math.
When is 4 trillion? 3.61 trillion.
Stock at an all-time high today. So good news for the folks.
Is that because you're buying a new iPhone?
I'm definitely going to be buying a new iPhone in September because my thing is falling apart.
We go to the Mateo household
the
now.
Apple CarPlay doesn't work, Tom.
The Apple CarPlay
does not work.
Oh, it doesn't?
It does not. I'm not syncing with my new BMW.
We have to stop the show right now.
We have a problem. I'm thinking about getting.
Is that why the June ratings were so moldy? The Sweeney household.
It's not linking to my car. It's not linking to my speakers out on the expansive patio.
Lisa, I counted this weekend 4. What are the things in the ear called? The white things in the ear?
The AirPods.
AirPods?
Yeah, they work for that.
Kennel Fee has earpods now. Vetville had them. There was a point in the house this weekend where everybody in the house but me had the white things in the ear.
Yep.
I'm like asking people, empty the dishwasher, and nobody can hear me because they got. What do you do with an Apple turnover? Well, how many iPhones are you buying this fall?
I'm the one, I have the family plan, who has the lowest grade iPhone. What is up with that?
So are you upgrading as well? Dan Ives wants to know.
I'm going to have to.
I have to,
think
too.
Lisa and I are going to go to the store in our local town right on the corner there, and we'll walk in there.
Commie plot.
Okay.
I think my battery's getting weaker recently.
Oh.
Yep,
do you think the battery wears out?
Yep.
I don't know.
So anyway, I think the upgrade is
the
coming.
The AirPods is the biggest scam I've ever seen.
I mean, it's just like
one always breaks.
Don't get me going. Apple, let's just trade it down $1 off Lisa Mateo. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Right now, we have the NASDAQ up 0.4%, 81 points at 18,477. We are on records watch, so I want to point out these numbers. The Dow up 0.5%, 207 points at 40,209. The S&P 500 at up 0.3%, 20 points at 5,635. The two-year yield, 4.45%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.22%, and that's up 3 basis points. We have the 30-year yield, 4.45%, and that's up 5 basis points. Shares of Trump Media and Technology Group, want to take a look at those right now. They are up just a point right now, 1% after an assassination attempt on former President Trump. We have Macy's shares. They're taking a hit. They're down 15%. Its board decided to end talks with Ark House Management, Brigade Capital Management. And finally, Amazon shares. They're up about 0.1%, but Prime Day begins tomorrow. Adobe estimates U.S. shoppers will spend $14 billion online with Amazon and other retailers during this two-day event. That's up almost 11% from last year's event. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Trump Media up 28%, 28% with a big lift this morning. Dow up 200 points. We're going to get to Jordan Fabian here. We've really been Milwaukee and Trump focused, and Mr. Fabian holding court in the basement of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But we got some housekeeping to do here. This is from Ari out on live chat on YouTube. He's on a cruise from Staten Island to Brooklyn.
Nice.
It's really nice. I mean,
Yep.
it's like great. He says, we need a Vespa update.
Sure.
This is serious stuff we're talking about, and we need some light points. Can you just give us one Vespa anecdote? Lisa and I are waiting. I mean, what did we do on the Vespa this weekend?
Vespa this weekend was a good weekend, cruising up and down the Jersey Shore, through all the great Jersey Shore towns. Just a great way to get around.
Really? You go up and down the shore?
Yeah, great way to get around.
Are you the idiot cutting around in and around cars stuck in traffic?
I'm kind of, as long as I'm in traffic. I'm part of traffic. I'm right there with you. But it goes up to 40. You got my gal in the back, and there you go.
Have you taken it to the package store yet?
Yes, we've got the little container. Yeah, we've got
the little container
in the back that you can put some sundry items back there.
Sundry items.
Exactly. Exactly.
Sundry items. Okay.
Yeah, so
Lisa, you got a question on the Vespa here? I mean,
that's what I want to know. Can you go stop at the grocery market? Is it that much?
A little bit. Yeah, okay. A little bit. But it gets you back and forth to the beach in about 3 minutes.
When you park it, do you chain it?
No, it's got a little lock. It self-locks.
It self-locks?
Yeah.
So no one can take it?
No one can take it.
Okay.
Exactly.
We're learning every day. Ari, thank you for that note. That's great.
Yeah.
Jordan Fabian taking notes. Can you see Jordan in a Vespa tooling around the White House? We've done so much at Milwaukee and on this horrific assassination attempt. We thought we would finish with thoughts from Jordan Fabian, our White House correspondent here, on the President's Week. Jordan, how will President Biden adapt and adjust daily to what's going on in Milwaukee?
Well, Tom, before Saturday night, you heard President Biden really sharpen his attacks on Donald Trump, including at that rally he had Friday in Detroit. Now you're seeing him pivot to a message of national unity. You heard that from him last night in the Oval Office, and he's going to continue with that message this evening with a primetime interview with NBC. But campaign officials are telling us that he's going to pivot back to drawing those contrasts with Donald Trump as soon as tomorrow.
Do you detect in your reporting, and Paul mentioned this earlier, that the President Biden, you got to give it up and move on people will pull back over this key interview this evening, that he won't have the scrutiny during this interview that he would have had before this assassination attempt?
Absolutely. We're told by donors that this assassination attempt has kind of taken the buzz out of that effort to force him out, that the sense is that...
let me interrupt. Jordan, this is critical. Yeah. Taken the buzz out or just postponed it?
Well, that remains to be seen. But the view from one donor who we spoke to over the weekend is that replacing him would just add more chaos to an already fraught moment in the country. Now, if things settle down in a few weeks and the president makes another performance like he did at that debate, I would imagine this talk crops up again. But for now, all of that is on hold.
what do we expect to hear from the White House and from the Biden campaign during the during the Republican convention in Milwaukee?
The president's getting out on the road on his own, Paul. He's going to go to Las Vegas. He's speaking to major Black and Latino groups. He's going to do a primetime interview on BET. So reaching out to two key groups he needs to win the election, groups that have sort of went away from him, and trying to get them fired up again, and again drawing those contrasts with Trump.
Jordan, one final question. We've got to get back to the markets, but I'm fascinated your take on this because you're living it. There's always an odd relationship between a president and a vice president. We're going to get a vice president today from Donald Trump. That's scheduled, folks. It could be someone much like him. It could be Governor Haley, not at all like him. The relationship of Biden and Harris, describe that as Jordan Fabian sees it.
It's not as close as the Biden-Obama relationship was when they were in the White House. There's been some frustration from the White House about Vice President Kamala Harris's performance, but she's done a little bit better this year, so her stock has risen. And right now, in this fraught moment when there's been talk about replacing Biden, he's been bear hugging her, keeping her close, and she's been careful not to cross him either. So try to position both themselves for what happens next.
Jordan, thank you for the view from Washington as we turn to Milwaukee. Mr. Fabian is our White House correspondent. Paul, your thoughts on what we observed this weekend and as we attempt, still in shock, to pick up the pieces?
I think the biggest, or one of the biggest questions I think most people have is, to what extent, if at all, will the events of this weekend change Donald Trump? I mean, I think a lot of people would say, boy, you go through a near-death experience like that, and it could really change the way you think, the way you speak, the way you interact with people. Will something change fundamental with former President Trump or not? And I guess, boy, the timing of this convention is really extraordinary. So we'll learn pretty quickly.
We got mixed opinions in the honor today, folks, of having Rudalevige of Bowdoin, Feynman, his definitive book on assassination, and Robert Kaplan. Even there, Paul, there were mixed opinions about your arch question.
Yeah.
Will Donald Trump change? I believe we heard yes, it could happen.
Yeah, we'll see.
And others said no.
Yeah, and if he does change, if he does moderate some of his positions and some of his rhetoric, how will that, kind of resound with his base, who, even if you see it on social media.
Yeah, but the base has nowhere to go but him,
I guess.
I would suggest.
Yep. Yeah, that's very, very
possible. I leave that to
possible.
Greg Giroux and other experts, Cook's Political Report.
Right.
Charlie Cook with us last night on Balance of Power, but they don't have anywhere to go. I'm fascinated by the shades of gray out to purple.
Right.
And I have no idea. I've gotten some heat. Look, did you see the hate mail I get out on YouTube live chat? I don't have a clue, folks, who the vice president's going to be. All I know is Bloomberg will cover it.
Yes, absolutely.
And I said this earlier, I think in the first hour. I remember Quayle.
Yes.
And Lisa, trust me, 100%. Dan who?
Yeah, exactly.
And it was stunning.
But still, one of the strangest VP selections that I can remember is McCain and Sarah Palin. I mean, nobody saw that coming. And you would think, boy, this first really big decision as a potential candidate.
Alaska.
And that's the call you make. Wow.
Do you think it's? I'm sorry, Lisa, jump in here. I think it's about swing state politics. Rubio's in Florida, okay? I believe Mr. Trump is in Florida. You can do whatever the registration is.
Rubio can just move.
All right, Trump judge dismisses Florida classified document case. So another piece of significant news associated with Mr. Trump. Certainly a positive.
So he's got to rewrite the speech a third time.
I guess a third time. So we'll have further reporting on that, but certainly a positive development.
And this, I assume, I'm making it up, folks. Stay with me here. Is off of the Supreme Court decisions of 10 days ago-ish.
About immunity?
About different shades of this, and full disclosure, I don't understand it all. But I wonder if we're going to see more of this, and particularly the New York State judicial process that the former president just went through. But there is a headline right now. Yep. We'll have much more coverage into Paul Sweeney's 10 o'clock hour. Trump judge dismisses Florida classified documents case. We'll see where that leads out. Thank you to our team, to Brockton, to the accountant for just incredible work here to keep us abreast. We'll do this again tomorrow. From New York City, an eventful day for Bloomberg News in New York and Milwaukee and Washington. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.